Thank you.
Okay, we're good.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. It is 7 o'clock and adequate notice has been given. And so we are going to start our meeting, as we always do, with the pledge to the famous flag in Sean's office. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All righty. So we are going to start with recognizing our own, as we often do. And today we have a very special recognizing our own. It's recognizing our soon-to-be own. And that's Dr. Nisha Patel, our new, soon-to-be new, well, our new superintendent, but soon to take that role on. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Sean, and then I will welcome Nisha. Welcome, Dr. Patel.
Thank you.
Awesome to have you here. Sean, do you want to go first, or you want me to go first?
No, I was gonna welcome Dr. Patel, and just, like you said, this is an opportunity for recognizing individuals within our community, and this is the newest member of our community, and we're excited to welcome Dr. Nisha Patel to our board meeting, and we're excited about her being the new superintendent starting July 1st, and I am just thrilled that I get the opportunity to work with her this spring to help with this transition and to support her along the way.
Awesome.
And I know Dr. Patel would like to share just a few things too, so I'll pass it over to you, Joe.
Well, you know what? I will. I'll let Dr. Patel share something first, if you want, or and then I can go after you.
Perfect. I will do that. Well, I just wanted to first and foremost thank you, President Miller, and the rest of the board for having the confidence and belief in me, and giving me the absolute honor of being the incoming superintendent for the school district of Clayton. I can't express to you how humbling this is to me, and I simply want to thank all of you. And then also I want to take this opportunity, Sean, to thank you as well. You're one of the kindest people I know, and you're an outstanding leader, and you have a passion for what you do and a love for learning. And those are qualities I absolutely admire. And I thank you for all your support already that you have given me, and I look forward to working with you in the near future as well. And then to the community, I cannot wait to get to know our students, our wonderful staff, our parents, and start building those relationships in the upcoming months. And I also hope, during that time that you get to know me a little bit better and my journey, throughout my lifetime. I'm a big quotes person. So one of my favorite quotes is by a gentleman that I admire a lot and all the work that he's done. And it's Nelson Mandela's work. And we've all heard the quote, right? That education is the most powerful weapon that we can choose to help change the world. Education is the most powerful weapon we can use to help change the world. And the reason that quote is near and dear to me, and I've shared this a little bit with you already, but because it has a direct correlation to the life of a young girl who was born over 8,000 miles away from here, across the Atlantic Ocean, in a country of Kenya, and who then came to the great United States of America at the age of 9, and her world changed. And it changed because of the power of education. It changed because people believed in her, embraced her, and gave her a sense of belonging. And not because, or not despite her identity, it was because of her identity. And so for me, as your incoming superintendent, I am on a mission, and I am on a mission to help change the world. And I know that we can do it together. And I believe that in my heart of hearts, and we can do that together because of having specific focus areas. And one of those focus areas, a huge part of it, is our work around equity and inclusion. It is part of the strategic plan that I believe in. And not only that, it's about personalized learning. It's about meeting the social emotional needs of all of our students. And we can do it. And I believe we will do it. So I am so excited to do this. I am excited to continue the norm of excellence in the school district of Clayton. And we will get it from excellence to even transformational. So I really thank you for letting me be a small part of the upcoming journey. I cannot wait. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patel. We really appreciate it. And I just want to say, kind of on behalf of the board, how excited we are. But I also just want to share, even with the board, what I think is really awesome about you is that not only have I gotten overwhelmingly positive response from our community, but as many of you know, I work in education, right? So I work with other superintendents. I work with other principals, with other administrators, and I've gotten overwhelming support for you from them. You know, today it was a central office administrator in another district. Yesterday, it was a person who was a former superintendent who works for DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. They all keep saying, man, Clayton's so lucky to have Nisha. So, or Dr. Patel, excuse me. But,
Nisha.
but so I just want to share that with you and with the community too. It's really cool, right? It's not like I'm out there advertising it, right? I mean, these are people reaching out to me saying, gosh, Joe, I just want you to know, I know Nisha from this and she's great. So I just wanted to share that with you too. So
thank you. Thank you. I'm the lucky one.
So, I think that's that is kind of our recognizing our own. So we can't wait. Thank you.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing you guys soon. Take care.
Thanks. So we are then going to move on to the Superintendent Communication. Sean.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so, well, good evening again, everyone, and Happy New Year to all of you. This is actually our first public meeting of 2021. And although it's our first public meeting, the Board of Education has had many, many meetings over this month. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for the time and energy you dedicated to the superintendent search. Not a lot of people know all the work that you have been doing. And so I just wanted to publicly say thank you to the board for all the time and energy you put into this really important process. And just by that presentation and just what you saw, it shows that the fruit of your labors really paid off. And so I just want to say thank you for all that you did. And a new year offers new beginnings, but it's still a very difficult time. And we're still dealing with a lot of difficult things within the district. And one of those is our current learning model. Where the learning model is different than our typical time. And we have learned how to be adaptable over this last year. And just wanted to remind everyone that we are currently still in that learning model of full schedules for our pre-K through 5. And then for 6 to 12, we have a hybrid schedule. And we started out in the same model that we had at the beginning for the first semester. And we were intentional about that so that way we could have a smooth start into the third quarter. And that really did pay off. And we saw that we had a good start to the third quarter. And we've continued to implement effective risk mitigation measures that have allowed us to keep our staff safe, our students safe, and making sure that we're doing everything possible to mitigate transmission within our schools. And so this is not the most ideal situation, but again, our district has constantly been not just staying status quo. Once we make a decision, we're thinking about what's the next decision and what is next. And we know that the instructional model is currently different at our secondary level and still really different at our elementary and preschool model as well, just because of the structures we've had to put in place. And I think it's important to just share that at the secondary level, we have really prioritized the standards and those skills that are absolutely necessary for our students to progress through our coursework. And so we're not trying to fit everything that we normally do into a shorter period of time. But what we're doing is making sure that we're prioritizing standards and skills to make sure that with the time that we have, they're still learning what is not absolutely necessary for them to progress. And we're also being cognizant of looking at the amount of time that we're using for assessment, because assessment does take a lot of time. And we're looking at how we can use formative assessments to make sure we know where students are, but not taking a substantive amount of time away from instruction. And so before we started this third semester, we looked at examining anything that we needed to change for this upcoming semester, looking at all those risk mitigation measures. We got some community input from our students, our parents, and our staff. And what we learned from our students is that they are, it's interesting. There's kind of a dichotomy between what the students had to share and what parents had to share. Students were saying that they were feeling really overworked and feeling like they had a lot on their plates. And some of them shared that they were, concerned about, their well-being. And they were sharing some positives too about what's been happening within the schools, and also giving us some insight about those things that have been working well that could influence some of the things that we change, moving into the future. And our parents have been showing their appreciation by the things that we have done, but also see, that it's also the next step is to see if we can extend that time at the secondary level, and have really wanted us to examine potential ways we could do that. And then the staff, we surveyed the staff in the fall, and we used that data to have a work group in December, which gave us some ideas about ways that we can support our staff better and making some additional changes. And so the staff is really wanting us to make sure that we're being very thoughtful about using their voice in decisions moving forward. And in determining our next steps, we are looking at what we can do this semester to extend that time. First, starting to look at Y-Down first. And we don't have a timeline or anything like that yet, but we are going to start those conversations. And not that we haven't started those conversations, but starting at the administrative level and then getting the input from teachers about what are some next steps. The other thing I think it's important is that when we start making these changes, we are going to have to make sure that we're communicating with our community about why we're making these changes. And some might say, oh, if you're making these changes, how is that going to impact our risk mitigation measures? And we're going to have to be very clear about why we're making those decisions, because as part of this process is happening, we're learning more about the science behind risk mitigation measures, and we will evolve. But I know that we'll have to be very clear with our communication, as we've done in the past, to make sure people understand the why behind our decisions. And the other thing is that it's important for us not only to look at what we're doing just to get by. We're looking at what did we learn from this experience, and what can we think about how we can evolve for the future in terms of way schedules look, and the way that students, different opportunities for students to have choice and different approaches. So we're using this as an opportunity as well to think differently. The other thing I know that people have on their minds are the vaccines. And when are we going to get vaccinations for our staff? Because I think the thought is that once we get that, we can start planning differently. And I just want to remind everyone that staff, our educational staff, falls in what we call category 1B. And I share with the Board of Education, and in that category, there are 3 different tiers. And staff members from schools are in that tier 3. Tier 1 and tier 2 have been activated, and those individuals have been able to get vaccinated. We are not clear yet when that activation for tier 3 is going to happen. But what I will say is that we have a very incredible leadership with our nursing program, and our nurses are working diligently to make sure they're not only taking care of our students and staff, but also making sure that they're thinking, advocating for getting the vaccinations for our staff and looking at systems for doing that effectively. And so we don't have all the answers yet. And I also think it's important that people don't think that once vaccinations happen, everything goes back to normal. That's not going to happen. We are still going to be putting risk mitigation measures in place. and that there are still going to be some things that are different than what was when we were before the pandemic hit. So I just don't want people thinking that this is the end all be all change to everything, but it's going to be an important step. I also want to just also make sure that I share with you again that we believe in the risk mitigation measures that we've put in place, and we're seeing that there's effectiveness with it. Our transmission, we're keeping the percentage of number of students who quarantined and the cases, they're very low. And this data is showing us that what we're doing is helping and is working within our schools. And so I just think it's important for you and the community to see that. I believe it's also important that as a community and as a learning community, we can't only focus on COVID. We can't just focus on the pandemic. We need to continue our work that we started before this all happened. It's important for us to put energy into our strategic plan, making sure that we are taking steps to align looking at our goals, making sure that we have common language around those goals. One of the things we recently did as a district was created a video that I shared with the board, and hopefully we share with the public too. It was an opportunity for us to have it's about the strategic plan and what our strategic plan is about. And we use that video as a teaching tool and a common conversation tool with our staff, so that way we can develop some common ground about what we mean in our strategic plan. We're also looking at our curriculum coordinators are doing work around deep learning. And then we also have a group of people who are doing some work around really truly defining what it means to have a personalized, individualized, and differentiated experience, because they are different. And then the other thing is that we're looking at those systemic changes that are going to impact the way we do things and ultimately impact our students, and making sure they're provided an equitable experience, and making sure that we're looking at the social and emotional well-being of our students as well. And so the strategic plan is integral to our work, as Dr. Patel said, and it's going to be something that is, I believe it's very aspirational, it's very visionary, but it's also making sure that we're taking into consideration excellence and making sure we're holding ourselves accountable to that. As part of that strategic plan, we are continuing to be a fiscally responsible district. And tonight, you're going to hear a little bit more about the budget planning process. But now that we have a new strategic plan, this is an opportunity for us to also think differently about what we're doing as a district in terms of planning with our budget. We have been using a zero-based budgeting model, which we will continue, but now we're looking at ways to build on that. We've been very fiscally responsible and able to, and after Prop E, we were able to start building up our fund balance again. We're not deficit spending, but we also are going to have to think differently about, if we're putting goals in place, how are we aligning our resources to those goals? And then how are we measuring whether or not that investment is having a return? And so it's building on the processes that we already have in place, but it's holding us accountable to say, if we're going to do this and we're going to invest human capital and funding into these goals, then we have to have a mechanism in place to evaluate whether or not we're getting dividends. And it's a great way of making sure that we're aligning resources, and it aligns with that evergreen model that if something's not working, then we need to evolve and change it. Next week, we are going to be starting our community board fiscal advisory. And this is an opportunity for us to have community members to take an outside view of our budget planning process and our budget as a district. And we've done this in the past, and it's a way for us to get community investment in our budget, but also to give us some insight about things that maybe we haven't thought about. And so it's a way that the board can engage the community in a different way. And then the other thing that I'm really going to be dedicating time to over this next couple of months is the new superintendent transition plan. And I will tell you that I am dedicated to Dr. Patel's success, because I want to make sure that, if she's successful, our district is successful and our students are successful. And I am committed to making sure that I'm doing everything possible for the next 5 months to support the work of the district and to support Dr. Patel. And so I'm going to be collaborating with her, and we already got some meetings set up that we're going to be looking at a transition plan and making sure we're investing time over this semester to help her in terms of developing relationships and then learning about systems within our district, but also being respectful that she's still running a school district in another part of St. Louis. So we're really excited about doing that work together. And then the other thing is, I have shared with the board that there are and on top of everything else, we also have legislation out there that is important for us to be aware of. All of you are elected officials, and as the superintendent of a district, I need to be aware of legislation that could potentially have impact, not only on the way that we do school, but also our funding. And so there is Senate Bill 55 that's out there that we have been looking at. And we really need to make sure that we're staying educated on what legislation's out there and where we need to advocate, and maybe talk to our senators and our representatives to tell them how we're feeling about some of this legislation. This Friday, we're going to have our first legislative advocacy meeting in collaboration with other districts within the region, and we'll learn more about what that legislation is and what are those things we can do as board, as administrators, and as elected officials to address some of those. And then finally tonight, we're going to have an opportunity to learn more about our equity work. And our equity work is very, very prevalent in our strategic plan, and it needs to be. It's part of our culture, and it's a way that we make sure that every student, no matter who they are, who walks through our doors or who is on our screens, is getting an equitable experience and is treated with dignity and has a sense of belonging and feels safe and has every opportunity to grow and excel in many, many ways. And I believe our work that we're doing is bold, it's vision driven, and it's actionable. And so you're going to hear a little bit more about that tonight. And what I appreciated about it is that this work is not just about the few doing it. We're developing collective capacity and collective efficacy around this work. And it's not just one voice, and it's not just one individual who's leading it. It's all of our collective responsibility, and appreciate the board's dedication to that as well. So that is just an update about some of the things that we're currently working on in terms of our learning models, some other things associated with strategic plan and legislation and fiscal responsibility. And I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions, and then turn it over to Caitlin for her student report.
Thanks so much, Sean. So we'll just go around the horn, and Stacy, you're first. So do you have any questions? No? Okay. Amy, any questions?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. Kim, any questions?
No, thanks, Sean, for the comprehensive update. It's maybe a follow-up for a future board meeting, but it's not something I think that's pressing to the district, and certainly all districts are facing the same thing. But at any point, does our district in particular do any type of gap analysis on the impact of the pandemic on learning compared to previous years? So as you start thinking about planning for third quarter and beyond, and integrating Nisha into responsibilities for the next school year, maybe during the next board meeting, you can let us know what the thoughts are from the administration and the teachers as far as how we're looking at reflectively as we start to plan for the future this year versus previous years.
No, thank you, Kim. And we are going to have part of a board meeting to talk about our assessment report, and it's going to be about where are we now, and we're continuing to do benchmark assessments, and so we still need to be responsible for seeing how our students are doing.
Great.
Thanks, Kim. Gary, any questions?
I don't think I have anything that it would be properly called a question, but just two comments. Sean, number one, I really appreciate the effort that you're making to help us with the transition and the time with Nisha. So thank you for that. I don't want to miss the chance to say that publicly. And number two, those legislative advocacy group meetings that are coming up, the first one on Friday, I just would really encourage everyone if you can, to tune into that. It's a little more accessible since it's all online, and we can all do it from home or office or wherever. I will say that my first year on the board, when I first started going to those meetings, I probably thought I knew and understood a lot more than I did, and it was a really good educational process that I think we can all benefit from. So to the extent you can tune into any part of that, I just would really encourage that.
Yeah, and Gary, that was a part of the decision that the board subcommittee made, is that we used to assign people to go to those legislative advocacy meetings, and now it's open to everyone. So all of you should have gotten the link to that.
Really appreciate that.
Great, thank you. Caitlin, any questions or comments?
No.
Great, thank you. Jason, any questions or comments?
No.
Thank you. David, any questions or comments?
No, thanks.
All right, thanks. So again, Sean, I just want to also just say thanks for your update and all the work that you continue to do now and with transition and everything else.
You're welcome.
I think
my pleasure.
We're moving to Caitlin to see if you have a update for us.
Yeah, so good evening, everyone. And today I'll be talking a little bit about this upcoming semester. So as we enter a new semester, something that I'm going to be doing in my student updates is talking about one thing that COVID-19 has taught us about what changes we can make to in-person school. So last meeting, I touched on the idea of rethinking finals. In this meeting, I'm going to talk a little bit about this new level of interactiveness that students have gotten, even when they're not able to be in in-person school, and how maybe we can apply that in future years when students have to take an extended leave of absence or are homesick. So some things that students have really been enjoying are the weekly schedules that teachers are putting together, and class agendas, and just that overall greater level of organization. Also, all the assignments and materials being posted on Google Classroom for the online students, given in person for the in-person students, and just having all of that material. And then also alternatives like recording classes so that students can still be in the class environment even when they're not in in-person school. And then my next topic that I'll talk about is conversations in classrooms. So in response to the storming of the Capitol on January 6th, then a lot of teachers held discussions in their classrooms to hear about student thoughts on the events. So I asked a couple of students about their opinions on this and if they thought that these kind of conversations were helpful for them. And students really liked that. They enjoyed that they were able to put aside the material for a part of class in order to help process a lot of major events that were going on in our world and heavily weighing on some students. And these conversations also tie into the profile of what a Clayton graduate is supposed to be, like self-actualization, collaboration, intellectual curiosity beyond just the academic and AP material. So something going forward might be having greater dialogue throughout all classrooms, including in some STEM classrooms, as like most of these conversations do happen in humanities classes. And as for some school updates, so third quarter is competition season for a lot of different clubs. So here's some highlights. Clayton High School's Quiz Bowl A team won first place at an invitational last weekend. The Linguistics Club is competing in the North American Computational Linguistics Open Competition tomorrow. And also the Clayton High School Science Olympiad team is hosting a CHS tournament for the very first time next Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. We appreciate it. So we are going to move to information items. And so our first information item is our equity update. All right. Welcome, Cameron.
So I'll be leading that. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay, perfect. I am going to share my screen. Thanks. All right, so pretty much for the update, a lot of the things that, we normally were going to talk about during this point in time, we kind of covered in December at our last board meeting. So I'm going to kind of gloss over that and I put it in the report just as a reminder of some of the things that we already talked about. So a lot of the things that we're going to touch on as a collective group is going to have to do with kind of what we're currently working on and what we're looking at within the next month or so in terms of things we're looking to accomplish. So I'm gonna kind of lead through it, and then kind of each member of the central office cabinet is going to look at and talk about kind of what equity looks like in their own sphere of what they're working on. So I kind of wanted to kick it off with a small portion from our ABAR presuppositions that were developed by our teachers in the summer. What we want to do and where we want to achieve as a district is having equity literacy, which is the definition that we use for it on the website. And it talked about equity literacy is defined as having the knowledge and skills to disrupt and dismantle inequities. So not only have the knowledge and skills to disrupt them and identify them, but what are we going to do in order to get rid of them within our own spheres of influence? With a lot of the different trainings and sessions that different groups of teachers have went through, we've really been trying to focus on what our spheres of influence are within the educational process and how inequities creep into those based off of some of the practices that we've been doing kind of on a daily basis. So kind of that personal accountability piece in that. And then spilling over to the staff and greater community as well. And we're committed to becoming an anti-racist district where race and socioeconomic status are not predictive of learner outcomes. So kind of in that foundational phase of really building capacity in order to really do the work. So, as we were, really analyzing, our strategic plan and what a profile of a graduate is, I started thinking and looking at the traits of being, self-actualized, intellectually curious, empathetic, culturally competent, a creative thinker, and a collaborator. If this is what we want our graduates to look like, then we need to be able to model these behaviors on a daily basis. So, my challenge, to all of us as a collective is let's be that profile of a graduate, in order to model the behaviors, that we want our students to have. We need to be able to kind of be an embodiment of that and an example of that profile on a daily basis. So as we really look at, the work that we're doing in order to, grow in cultural competence, it really surrounding and being mirrored around what that profile is looking like. So as we kind of go through what we're looking at today, and kind of taking a page out of Sean's book when he went through, I'm sorry, Dr. Doherty's book when he went through the strategic plan update last time, I kind of want to mirror everything that we do around our ABAR presuppositions. So we have kind of 3 tiers and categories that we look at in terms of personal, institutional, curricular, and instruction. So everything that we're doing is going to fit under one of these categories, and kind of making sure that we're fulfilling the presuppositions ourselves with the work that we're doing in structuring around that. So this is just kind of, small recap of our ABAR presuppositions. There's a QR code and a link in order to have access to those more in depth, but just kind of looking at each category having at least 2 presuppositions in it and how we're using those categories and those individual presuppositions to kind of look at our work. So as we, start to really tackle a lot of the inequities, okay, what are we doing from an institutional standpoint? And how are we, affirming a student's culture, or from a personal standpoint, how are we recognizing and eliminating inequities? And from a curricular standpoint, how are we cultivating classroom practices that are culturally responsive? So really looking at what we're doing and seeing if what we're doing is matching up with a certain presupposition that we have. So kind of those action steps again, what is the work that we're doing and how are they falling under different categories within our presuppositions? So I'm going to kind of scroll really quickly through some of these, and then at the end of each category, each person within their department is going to kind of go into detail exactly what they've been doing and working on. So kind of that personal piece, I linked the profile of a graduate to, a different tier within the presupposition. So when I think about the personal aspects of the presuppositions, I automatically thought of, being empathetic and self-actualized. And how are we being empathetic and self-actualized and fulfilling those presuppositions, and how does our work mirror that? So these are kind of a long kind of laundry list of, a lot of the things that we talked about back in December when we gave an update on our strategic plan. And this is what we're going to focus on socially under that personal category. So, each member is going to just share kind of their bullet point and expand on that and how that's working into what we want to accomplish within our strategic plan. So Dr. Doherty is up first.
So one of the things we wanted to share is that we as a district are constantly looking at this as, examining ourselves, but we know that we're one district in a region of many districts. And we have been working I've been working with a planning group, and actually Dr. Patel is in this planning group as well, around how could we potentially build the capacity of leaders or superintendents throughout the entire region in order to make sure that they have a deep understanding about what it means when we talk about equity. What does it mean when we talk about race? What does it mean when we say a sense of belonging? And so we're going through a 9-week learning experience where our superintendents are getting a common learning experience. And the goal is that we all have a common context, and we're getting this as being facilitated by outside consultants through Ed+. But then what it does is then gives us a basis for conversations about how can we work as a region across borders to make sure that we are doing what we can to reduce inequities within our region. And so just wanted to share that, and that learning is also then can then be applied to each of our districts. So that way every superintendent can be a leader of equity.
Thank you. And then we'll move on to Dr. Wings.
Yes, so the Office of Student Services is excited to be hosting our first practicum student. We have selected a student from the Brown School of Social Work who just started this week, and she'll be supporting my work and Mr. Poole's work in the area of equity and inclusion. She'll have a primary focus on helping us collect more data from our students through focus groups and helping us prepare resources for teachers to use during professional development and in other spaces where we are participating in adult learning. Also, in the last few weeks, we launched an affinity group for our Asian and Hispanic district educators. It was a really positive opportunity for our educators of Asian and Hispanic backgrounds to come together and decide how we were going to continue to come together as a community. And we are looking forward to bringing that group together again several times before the end of the school year.
Thank you. And then Dr. Arnold.
So retention is an area that we're working on to continually monitor and improve with our staff and administrators of color. So this year we have begun stay interviews with our teachers and administrators of color. And stay interviews are really helpful because they provide us with qualitative data and opportunities for us to engage employees. And that will help us meet our retention goals. And really a stay interview is a structured discussion with individual employees, and it helps us learn specific actions that we can take to strengthen employee engagement and retention in the district. It's a little bit different than surveys, and I personally think better than surveys because they do 3 things that surveys do not. First one is they bring information that can be used today in the present. They give us insights for engaging and retaining individual employees, and they also provide us with what I like to call responsive opportunities for helping develop individual stay plans. So I think it's one of the best tools for measuring employee engagement. It's a focused effort that we can collect that one-on-one feedback to provide us with ways to better understand why employees stay, and then also like what they enjoy about working in the school district of Clayton, and also what might cause them to leave. What are they not enjoying about working in the school district of Clayton? And that information that we gather can help us really take a deeper look at our systems and or design individual plans to help with the teacher retention. So the stay interview started back in December. We're focusing right now initially on our non-tenured teachers of color, and all teachers of color in the district will be offered a time to participate in a stay interview, one-on-one conversation with me by the end of February of this year.
Awesome, thank you. And just to kind of sum up, and referencing a portion of the presupposition that's in the title, we recognize that eliminating inequities begins with each of us, and looking at, Dr. Doherty and kind of the leadership that he's taken with superintendents around the area, and really putting it out there in the forefront that, not only is this, something that is dear to him, but something that is dear to him in terms of growing within the profession and leading the district, in that direction. And then I really love the humanizing aspect from, the development of the affinity groups and the state interviews. One thing that we reference in our presuppositions is that those experiencing said inequities, need to be listened to, and their stories need to be heard in order for everyone to humanize what people are going through on a daily basis. And I think, really building the affinity group, with all of our teachers of color, as well as establishing those state interviews, because retention of teachers of color is a huge issue as well. We often talk about recruitment, but when people come, are we creating an atmosphere that is welcoming for them? And I think those state interviews give us some great, data in order to use to, put measures in place within the district to continue to, build on that retention model. So the next level we'll look at is kind of our institutional work that we're kind of going through. We believe each student has a right to an equitable educational opportunity. So how are we exactly from an institutional level giving students that opportunity to have exactly what an equitable education is? And again, just kind of another bird's eye view of some things that we talked about at the last board meeting back in December. So now these are going to be the important points that we all talk about. So, I'll kind of start. One thing that, is very important, and probably one of the bigger priorities, for us to establish as a district is, to really, intertwine our equity work within our professional development framework and make it a staple within what we do, on a semester by semester and year by year basis. So one thing that we're kicking off, along with, our equity committee within the district, and I'm going to put out a, kind of a nudge and a request that our board takes part in this as well. In February, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to launch a 14-day equity challenge district-wide. And pretty much what that entails is we're going to kick it off with one of our professional development days to introduce the challenge. Then we're going to end it with a professional kind of development day to kind of unpack the challenge. And pretty much what it is we'll have an array of resources, that have to do with either, reading an article, watching a video, diving into a book, watching a series, tons of educational tools that revolve around equity and kind of that personal journey with equity. And you're going to do one thing each day for 14 days. So something may take about, a couple minutes to watch, or maybe it's about a 30-minute article, or it's a podcast or something to that level. And what we're going to do is on that first day, we're going to cohort into teams. So you kind of have a team that you're going through this challenge with. And you all are going to kind of chart your schedule out in order to see what exactly you're going to tackle. So each day you kind of go through, in a kind of a log that we're going to give each of the staff. You put in the title of whatever whatever you chose for your education that day, and kind of write a brief reflection. So for 14 days straight, that's the plan. And then on the last day in which we unpack it, building by building, getting with your cohort and kind of reflecting on your experience. And right now I'm working with the equity committee to kind of build what that structure looks like. So when we get started, it's well scripted, and members of the equity committee are leading that development with each individual building. So kind of having time to unpack with your cohort as well as with your building as a whole. I'd love for us as a central office team, as well as a board of education, to get together and kind of embark on this journey together, and kind of chart our path and choose our teams to kind of see the things that we learn, and kind of start, the conversation of what equity looks like, institutionally within our district, from this year moving forward. So I'm really looking forward to that. One thing that we're working with as well is kind of relaunching the Courageous Conversations that took place last school year. That was extremely powerful, within our faculty that were able to attend, in terms of really just humanizing and hearing the stories of, teachers of color, primarily our Black teachers within the district, and kind of what that experience is on a day-to-day, not only just in America, but just, within our school system as well. So looking to kind of make that a staple. We've got a professional development day in April that we have open, that we want to make sure that everyone within the district, has an opportunity to encounter courageous conversations, and then kind of creating kind of a sample menu style of, different courageous conversations to embark in. So that could be including, different racial groups, maybe of students and of parents, within the district as well, possibly some outside speaking and education, or, some kind of some video clip, breakdowns and discussions as well. So kind of creating an entire day that's dedicated to equity and kind of growing in equity, and trying to make these days and these events, something that we do annually. That's a big event that we can rally around, that we can celebrate, and that we can come together as a district and bond together. So those kind of what we're looking at now. Of course, really looking at our professional development structure, and what does equity look like within that, especially for the 21-22 school year. So looking at, as our teachers come in year one, what is the development year 1, year 2, year 3, and as they progress on to tenure status and things like that. So having a set equity curriculum for each cohort year that you're in within the district, as well as developing that common equity focus within our equity committee that each building is focusing on and tailoring toward their own building. So really working on that structure to kind of embed equity with everything that we do professionally, from a professional development standpoint. And then the implementation of parent affinity groups. We've kind of got that off the ground, from an employee aspect, but what does that look like with our parents? One of the things that that I heard a lot in the equity audit from our parents in terms of their experiences are, kind of again, the disconnect between the perceived experience and the actual experience, communication breakdowns, and changing the expectations for our students. And one of those main things too was that parent communication piece as well. So how can we, empower our parents, and rebuild that trust, that has been lost. So, the first step would be rebuilding trust, building an affinity group and camaraderie amongst the parents so they can use each other as a resource, and creating avenues, that they have the confidence to advocate, for what's going on, and that they know that they have the confidence that their voices will be heard too. So from an institutional standpoint, that's what we're kind of working on, mainly that professional development piece and what, annual equity events look like in the district year in and year out. And then really building our capacity with our parents to regain some trust that we might have lost in the past, and to empower and build confidence, for them to have in us, as a system. So that's what I'm on from an institutional standpoint. I'm going to pass it back to Dr. Weens, and she's going to talk about some of the work that she's doing with our summer academies.
Thank you. So I'm really excited about the work that we are doing right now to plan our academic summer programs. Really, the theme of some of the changes that we're making going into this summer are to help bring our summer programs more into alignment with our profile of a graduate and to our strategic plan. So after the strategic plan was approved, it gave me an opportunity to really reflect on what our students' needs are and how can we take advantage of the opportunities that kind of this new COVID environment has created in order to really reimagine how our students experience and grow during the summer. So I've been working closely with our elementary school summer program directors and with Dr. Helcher over at the high school to really think about how we might make some adjustments to those programs to better serve our students. More specifically at the elementary school level, we are going to continue to focus on developing those fundamental skills that our students need to have mastered in order to have a successful start to the following grade level. But really approaching it with a more potential-based and strengths-based approach. So we're going to be integrating a lot more project-based learning where students are going to have the opportunity to develop their collaboration skills, develop some of their cultural competency through the incorporation of some of the teaching tolerance, social justice standards, and just creating a more culturally responsive learning environment for our younger learners. Also, we're going to be applying this to the Y Down Summer Academy as well. I'm currently searching for a new director for that particular summer program. In addition to incorporating the teaching tolerance, social justice standards, as well as the fundamental math and literacy skills we know are very critical to the middle school age group, we're also going to be incorporating some equity and leadership development for our students. Really, again, thinking about the goals of the strategic plan, thinking about the goals of the profile of the graduate, and really helping our students, start to use their voice to end injustices for others through project-based learning experiences. And so we are really looking forward to reimagining this program, again, still rooted in student data and academic standards that we know are very critical to our students' academic success, but again, paying attention to the other parts of our students' identities that can be developed, so that way they can grow to be, intellectually curious and culturally competent citizens in our community. I feel like this approach is a lot more student-centered than maybe some of the previous practices we've put in place. And even with my work with Dr. Helscher, reimagining what CSA can look like, really trying to make some choices with the course offerings and then the format and the scheduling to make the program even more student-centered, particularly for our students who are looking at credit recovery situations. So we continue to innovate in this program. While COVID last summer created a lot of challenges for us, I feel like it really opened a lot of doors going into this summer for us to reimagine and create some really memorable and meaningful learning experiences for our students.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Arnold.
So this year we were very intentional in posting our positions early, our openings that we had, and we wanted to have those to be in alignment to our advertisement efforts of the District Diversity Recruitment and Networking Fair. So we posted the openings early in December, and then they closed last week, which was after the Diversity Recruitment and Networking Fair. The timeline that we chose has provided us with an earlier recruitment period and also helped attract top talent to the January diversity recruitment event. Many of our diverse applicants that we interviewed at the fair have already been invited back to interview at the building level. This year, while it was virtual and a bit of a different format than we had last year, we got creative, kind of thought outside the box, and we had a very successful event. So we couldn't be happier with how things went with our virtual fair this year. The feedback from administrators on the quality of our candidates and attendance has been very, very positive. So we're really excited about the possibilities that this recruitment event has provided for us. Along with that, with the Diversity Recruitment Fair, one of the things that we did this year too is, along working with the communications department, we created recruitment materials that focus on the district's equity focus. So we had a major recruitment social media campaign promoting our equity work. We had different pictographs and charts and visuals and indicating our work and growth in this area for our hiring over the last few years, showing that growth. Our teachers of color and administrators of color were highly involved in helping with developing videos, being featured there, sharing their stories, and then also participating in the networking component of the fair as well. We were on the radio promoting the event. And then also another area that I'm proud of too is where we have developed a Clayton recruitment video featuring the equity work and the diversity work. And we're going to utilize that at the upcoming Black Educator Symposium. And then we'll also be able to utilize those videos for future recruitment events as well. Another thing that we've done this year is develop a diversity hiring statement regarding our district's commitment to attracting a diverse teaching force and finding the best candidates for our positions in service of our students. So that's something that we can put on our website and put it out there in our materials and show what our commitment is to these efforts. Another area that we're working on, we recently, last week at our January District Leadership Council meeting with our administrators, Cameron and I facilitated learning around implicit bias. We spent some time in an exercise that really helped all of us as administrators identify and explore some of our own biases and have some conversations around that was really good. Our administrators were really thoughtful as part of that process, and one of the steps that we did throughout our time in that meeting was to develop some new interview questions that align to our ABAR presuppositions. And I think these questions will be really helpful, and the administrators agreed that we would be using these district-wide moving forward. Additionally, we were purposeful in our analysis of our current interviewing and hiring practices. So really what we wanted to do is determine what might be some potential modifications to our processes to help us move forward. And some of those that we identified, we are implementing immediately for the interviewing and hiring process that's going on right now throughout the spring. So due to some of that new thinking at this meeting, we created a resource folder for administrators that can assist them with streamlining the interview process. Some of the new resources include updated interview protocols, implicit bias review that they'll do with all the participants prior to the interview, the ABAR interview, a question bank that the principals developed, and then also how we review the various components of the interview process and not relying on a single data point to make a decision with the candidate. So we really walked away from the meeting last week with some great new ideas. Our administrators have been very appreciative of the time to have some meaningful conversations around this topic.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Dr. Arnold and Dr. Pools for our technology update.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So when we think about our ABAR work, especially within the institutional category, one area that technology can really impact is on a focus on breaking down barriers that students may encounter when accessing their learning. So prior to the pandemic, the district had moved to a one-to-one technology plan at the high school as a step toward removing some of those access barriers, both at school and at home for students. An offshoot of that plan included the distribution of internet hotspots to families that were in need of reliable access for students using their school-issued devices when they're away from campus. While the next phase of that plan would have been to expand that to the middle school this year, the current health crisis has really challenged us to extend our focus and work to reduce and eliminate access barriers, like I discussed, really at all levels. So our response so far has included a one-to-one rollout for all students K through 12, along with the distribution of a much larger number of internet hotspots for families in need. We've also provided a large number of tools and support for teachers to connect with at-home learners and enhance communication as the public health conditions continue to fluctuate. We are continuing to use this opportunity to really look for new and innovative ways to reduce and break down barriers with the use of technology.
Awesome, thank you. And then this is the awesome thing with the institutional work is that, you know, it's really looking at things from a systemic level and seeing what are some different things that we can put in place within our present systems, you know, to combat against, you know, decades of inequities that we've seen. This is the part I really get excited about because these are the things that are really going to stand the test of time. So when we look at things, you know, when we're on the other side of our strategic plan, we'll be able to look back and say, these are some systemic things that we've built, you know, that are solely, you know, directed towards combating against inequities and that can continue to grow in order to really repair a lot of the systems that we have. So then we're going to look at things from a curricular and instructional standpoint, you know, where we really look at, you know, the creative thinker and that intellectual curiosity lens as well. So again, kind of just scrolling through, you know, a lot of the things that we already kind of talked about. And then, you know, that brings us to our curricular component. So I'll step back and give it away here.
All right, thank you. So from the curricular and instructional standpoint, some of our departments that have honors courses are currently refining the processes for identification of students to be used this spring. So our overall goal being to reduce barriers and disrupt inequities in these processes. When we gave the strategic plan update, I shared the work at the high school around grading for equity. We continue to grow in this area and provide professional learning experiences to teachers to allow for their grades to meet 3 goals: accuracy, bias resistance, and motivation. Our humanities departments, so social studies, library, literacy, each have an equity goal embedded in their long-range goals that the board approved last spring. Professional learning in the form of some book studies have broadened teachers' pedagogical views of culturally responsive classrooms. Based on feedback from students and consultants, social studies has begun rewrites of the curriculum to include non-Western history and perspectives of historical events, starting with the high school curriculum. This includes bringing into the curriculum perspectives from other nations and cultures when studying particular aspects or timeframes of history. We continue to look at the materials in our library's collections to ensure that the stories and perspectives are diverse. We're working to involve student and family voice in this work. Those voices will guide our work through diversity audits for our collections, as well as collection development and title promotion. We've identified equity audit tools and begun to critically examine the materials that we're using in classrooms to eliminate things that don't support our ABAR work. And then professional learning around the teaching tolerance standards has started in pockets and will be universal for all elementary classroom teachers at the February Professional Development Day. So these teaching tolerance standards that we talked about with the summer programs, our teaching tolerance standards for social justice fall into 4 domains: identity, diversity, justice, and action. In choosing these standards to help guide our work, we can commit to universal shared language, and these standards align with our profile of the graduate.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Gardner. So I'll stop sharing my screen. That's kind of where we're at. I think we got a lot of the things in place. I feel like we're building a foundation of a lot of great things that could, launch us in the right direction and kind of, set the tone for what, equity work looks like within our educational system.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that very comprehensive presentation. So I'm just going to go around and see if various board members have questions. So David, I am going to start with you.
Thanks, Joe. Cameron and team, I really appreciate the update. I think one thing that I'm growing to appreciate here with the work that you're doing is every time you sit down with us, it gets better and better. It's always at a high level. Here's what I'm learned. Here's what we're going for, and it's getting more comprehensive, which is kind of a pleasure to sit through and watch. One thing that I don't need an answer maybe, in here, but one thing that I was trying to understand, and I can't find it on our district webpage, do we have a core set of KPIs or key performance indicators that are driving the work and definition of success? If we were to go back and say, okay, we've been working on this full steam for 12 months, let's look at the metrics. And are we hitting our definition of success? And I know a lot of the work that you're doing, it's really difficult to define KPIs, but I think it's important that we're able to identify and quantify success in some regard, just from a metrics perspective, aside from social and emotional concerns and academic performance.
That's a good question. And that's probably something I need to be more explicit on. Like, for example, as Dr. Weeks was talking about the changes to, our summer academies. We have some kind of baseline data that shows, the level of success or lack of success that kids are trying, and, that kids are achieving, and, how often are they back at the summer academy the next summer. So I think kind of what we're doing now is kind of building the systems and then probably having a lot of more comprehensive data with that after a summer or two to kind of compare what those numbers look like in terms of, are we decreasing the number of kids that are coming or a number of kids that are qualifying to come in. And then even with the, I know, with the recruitment and the retention efforts, and keeping track of, what does our retention look like for the past few years, and what will it look like for the next few years, and how are we continually increasing, the teachers of color that we're recruiting and that are coming into the district. And then in terms of professional development systems that are being built, a lot of that comes to, building capacities with teachers. One of the big things that, we were able to take away from the audit was really our teachers not understanding, and our staff and our buildings not understanding the experiences that kids are having on an individual basis. So I think the big, and that leading to, a disconnect academically, that leading to, disproportionate behavioral numbers. So how can we work from an educational standpoint with our entire staff to humanize each kid's experience? And by humanizing each kid's experience, we're able to, I feel like most people in our teachers and our staff have, great empathy, but empathy comes with knowing. So it's kind of building that capacity with how can our teachers know, what that individual experience is, because a lot of them just don't know. And it's hard to combat against what you just don't know. And looking forward at what is our discipline data, achievement data. And I know one thing, me and Dr. Garganigo looked at implementing is, possibly with our students, especially as they're matriculating from 5th grade into middle school, or 8th grade into high school, or 12th grade into, their post-secondary educational experiences, kind of extending that state interview process with our kids and developing, a level of qualitative data to say, this was the experience of our kids that we looked at in 2020. Now we're looking at the experiences from 2023. How have they changed, either for the positive or for the negative? So part of, I think, building these new systems that we're building are building those metrics to be able to really look at that. And I think as time continues, we'll be able to have some baseline numbers to really say, this is how we're growing as a district. So yeah, definitely, the ability to.
We have the data dashboard that's connected with our strategic plan too, that's measuring our discipline, looking at our representation of students in courses, and looking at accessibility to programs. And so I will say that we don't have like the benchmarks that are set on each one of those, like, well, how will we know? But we know that where our baseline is in a lot of those areas, and if we're moving forward. But I do think we probably need to set more targeted benchmarks on that. So.
Yeah, and I recognize you have to, I think, Cameron, you kind of articulated it well. You've got to put the work in to figure out where you're at before you can figure out where you're headed. So it does take time. I just don't want us to get 6 months down the road and then we go, oh, wow, we kind of need to figure out where we're headed. So, even if that standard or that goalpost has to be adjusted as we learn new data, I think it's important that there's always a target. So, but thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, David. Jason, any questions or comments?
Yeah, first I want to say you all did an excellent job. Cameron, good job for putting this together. All you all did a great job, the whole entire administration. Team, that is. I can't help but ask myself, like David, what is, like, I want to just understand, like, what is the long-term goal kind of look like for us to be this district that we're talking about, anti-bias, anti-racist district. And then I have a follow-up question after that. So just, you don't have to necessarily know the answer, but if you have some kind of idea, like, what does it look like? Like, what does this look like?
Awesome. So that's a really good question. I think the big thing is, how we see what's working and what's not working based off of, again, putting together those metrics. And, I think, the most valuable thing that I've gotten are really just the testimonies, and the experiences from parents and students and teachers themselves in terms of their experiences. And, the lack of positive experiences that are there. That's why, especially, I think the best data we can get is kind of looking at things from kind of the stay interview model, that Dr. Arnold talked about with our staff and that retention, and kind of building a student component around that. So we can have some metrics and some bars in there to where, maybe there's a survey component in terms of rating what your experience is, and we're able to look and say, hey, where an experience was a 2.8 in 2020 and 2022, that experience is a 4.8. And I think, we want to make sure that, as we're going along and doing the work, that we have metrics that are representing exactly, what we're trying to accomplish. I think, the great thing about what we're doing is that, we're trying to establish and actually do some things that, quite frankly, most districts around the country have not been able to do. So, the process of trying to figure that out is what's the best way to quantify it. And I think, even looking at a lot of the ways in which we've quantified student success in the past has a cultural bias and cultural tint to it. So how can we create metrics that, don't have that cultural barrier, but that also kind of rate the experience and, the achievements of our students more so of meeting them, where they are. So I think that metric part is important because, again, we want to pull data that, and create ways to pull data that is really reflective of each student's experience to where maybe in the past our data is reflected maybe one student's experience. So, that's going to be the tough part. And that's going to be something that, as a collective, we're going to continue to, not only look at our baseline metrics with, things like discipline, which has been sort of weird this year just with COVID and not being in school in a traditional sense, and test scores as well. Because I think once we get on the other side of COVID, we're unearthing more and more inequities that, weren't there, to begin with, that were there that we just didn't see. So it's going to be a constant, maneuver, to see exactly what that looks like. And that's something that we have more defined, especially, moving in the next school year after we got a year under our belt, with implementing the work.
Gotcha. So it was, this evening, Caitlin brought up the insurrection that took place at our Capitol. And, this shows there is support for this type of belief system out there. And I guess my question is how do we know that sentiment isn't within our district, within our teachers? And then if it is, how do we ensure that we have our approach to making sure that ABAR becomes the theme, our goal? How do we deal with that situation? How is that going to be dealt with? Has anyone thought about that? Has that discourse happened at all amongst the folks in the administrative office?
Yeah, definitely at great lengths. Melena, did you want to kind of share what, some of the materials and the talks that we had, with the different coordinators in terms of having those conversations?
Right. So with the insurrection and then with the inauguration, our social studies coordinator, Dr. Helsher, worked really closely with his department to produce to curate some materials to put out to teachers to use and to think really carefully about how they have those conversations with students. And some of the things that we looked at were presenting teachers with materials to think about like media bias. And how different media approach those things. So to think about like how you choose the information that you use within the classroom to talk about that. I think also we've like from a bigger perspective, we've talked a lot about our ABAR presuppositions and what's the role that those play then within our standards of professional practice. For our teachers. And I don't know if Tony wants to talk about this, but like thinking about how do we integrate those within our standards of professional practice so that we're also looking to provide feedback to teachers about that work as they're growing and as we're growing as a system.
Okay, all right. And then my last question, we talked about, I mentioned early on about policy, ABAR becoming some type of policy. And looking at our current administration, they're trying to push for an executive order on diversity and inclusion, the whole 9 yards. Is that something we should be looking into at all right now? Has anyone thought about policy, ABAR becoming a policy, and trying to find so that we can hold folks accountable if they violate these rules or these things that we're putting in place right now that could harm children's ability to learn?
We haven't had the conversation about what policy would look like. I think Melena was speaking to is when we're talking about those standards of professional practice, that's what we hold people accountable in terms of evaluation. And so part of that evaluation model is that One, to give feedback, but also if people aren't adhering to those standards, we have to have some serious conversations about that. But I will say that we have not had that conversation yet about what policy would look like yet.
Gotcha. All right, so just to make this, just to have a dialogue with you, Sean, I love what you just said, because I understand that. And so my thought also is, like, I think about like why someone who would feel the way they feel, wanting to storm the Capitol and the beliefs that they have, right? And I thought about it. I'm like, well, there was once policy written. There was once an amendment written, a rule written, and then we voted it out. But however, people still believe, based on it being a written law, a written rule, we want to go back to something like that. And I'm just thinking, to really substantiate our position on being equitable, being inclusive and fair and balanced in our processes, that there might need to be some kind of policy written, because I think people go off of what was written. There's a history of, restrictive practices, restrictive deeds, people moving in neighborhoods, you name it, being 3/5 of a man, for example. I mean, a whole host of inequitable practices that were written into law. So just something I'm just thinking about as we have this discourse. Thank you.
Jason, Caitlin, any questions or comments?
Yeah. Thank you for all of your work, firstly. And my question is, I know a lot of this presentation was intentionally directed towards staff. Just tying that back into students, how can we make sure that the students are also benefiting from these types of practices? So like, for example, the Affinity Groups, anti-bias, anti-racist trainings. How can students directly get involved with that?
You know what? That's an awesome question that, I will admit, due to, COVID being a factor, as well as just really, getting our feet wet, systemically, is that, really picking up that student component, and what that looks like in terms of empowering students to take part in this work as well. And that's something that, those are discussions that we're, beginning to have. And, when we get on, especially looking into some of our goals for, how we finish up the year in terms of going into next year, really kind of making that a staple. I think, a lot of the energy has been dedicated to, staff and a lot of our systems that we have in place. And that student component is coming, and probably would have been more prevalent had we been in person. But with COVID, it kind of, made it more, made more sense to kind of concentrate on the others. And then once we get in, like, what do those systems look like from school to school? So as we're meeting and we're having sessions, it's all of us taking part with the students during the regular school day, immersing them in the work as well. So that's definitely, on the radar and on the next steps. And I'll be the first to admit and say that, that hasn't been at the forefront right now, but it's definitely something that, as we continue to expand and do this work, really encompassing that factor, K through 12, and making sure that, from the students to the staff to the community to all stakeholders, that, we're a part of it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add on to his response, Caitlin. That's actually one of the major things that our new practicum students going to be working on. Is I think that our students have a vast amount of knowledge around a lot of these issues that can help us better situate some learning experiences in this area. And so we plan on conducting quite a few focus groups with various types of students in our school district to help us shape what this work can look like, and how student feedback can really shape some changes that we can make in our instructional programs in a variety of places, and just in the school environment. How do we truly make school a place where everyone can learn? And so that's a piece that we're hoping to gather more information on is really utilizing our students' voices and our students' perspectives to improve the teaching and learning environment. So that's going to be one of the major projects that our practicum students going to be supporting Cameron and I in.
Yeah, thank you. I also think that's definitely like some intersection with the work that the practicum student will be doing, and also Nile Hopper, who's our student leader of diversity, equity, and inclusion, can work on together.
Thanks, Caitlin. Gary, any comments or questions? Gary, we can't hear you. We still can't. No, we still can't hear you. I'm gonna come back to you. So Kim, any comments or questions?
Yeah, so just a few. So thank you for the report to start with. And then I know there's already been some discussion about KPIs. I just want to point out that I think you guys are thinking about it in the right way as far as setting a baseline. And what I would encourage you to do is not be shy in setting the baseline, even if you only start with a couple KPIs. And I think you may have them without realizing that you already have them. When you talk about some of the discipline data, when you talk about some of the employment retention and recruitment data and the stay interviews that you already have, it's pretty easy to start collecting, information now to set that baseline for 20. And when you talk about, as far as the recruitment, how many people you met with at the fair, how many people that you invite back for a second interview come back, and then that sets the baseline for next year. I'm Milena. In the curriculum you talked about, there are already equity goals or targets in the humanities space, so you can use those as the baseline. My question there is, is it possible to replicate any of those goals? What are those goals? And then is it possible to replicate any of those in other academic areas, or is there something unique about the humanities which you just chose that first because you have more participation or more interest in participation? I know everything is supposed to be student-centered, so maybe that's the explanation there. And then the data dashboard, Sean, I know it's on the website. This is kind of ancillary to the equity discussion itself, but our website is pretty hard to navigate. So at some point, we should probably have a discussion about how to improve navigation to some of these important tools that are on the website. We can kick that can down the road, but the data dashboard within the website, using that tool where you have this stuff linked to the strategic plan and then adding some of these things, I think would be not as difficult as a lift as you might think it would be. And then to Jason's question about policy, I just want to make sure, I want to be clear to the community, everybody else, that, there's no intention of trying to, everybody's entitled to their own beliefs, right? That works in the school district, attends the school district, and there's no intention of trying to get people to disclose what those beliefs are. We have code of conduct policies for students. We have code of conduct policies for staff. Those are the policies that exist and that we hold employees and students accountable to. And maybe we need to look at those to make sure that, if there is behavior that's harmful to students from other students or from staff members, and that's what we do, but making sure that we don't have like certain entities or opinions that exist within the school. There's no like big brother is watching or any of that stuff that we have any intentions of doing, or any intentions of that we don't do that now. We have no intention of doing that in the future. So that's it.
Thanks, Kim. Gary, you want to try again? Uh-oh, you're still not. I'll tell you what, Gary, I'm going to go on to Amy and Stacy. If you have a question or a comment, type it in the chat maybe, and then we could, because we can't hear you. Amy, comments or questions?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I was having the same problem, Gary, earlier today. I don't know what's going on with Zoom today. So anyway, this was a really great presentation. I loved how comprehensive it was. And, you know, it ranged from curriculum to HR to technology to student services. So it's great that we're thinking about this so broadly and not just, you know, picking one small area and trying to put a Band-Aid on it. So I love that it's, you know, we're really thinking about this globally. And I thank you for that. As far as my questions are concerned, well, Caitlin, you hit the nail on the head for me with what are we doing for the students? That was a big question for me. Are we having affinity, these courageous conversations and affinity groups with the kids? And so thank you for bringing that up. And I have that question answered. Cameron, I wanted to ask you, as I was going through the report, you mentioned developing shared definitions of personalized learning. So I was wondering what that meant. I didn't know if that was I wanted just a little bit of clarification on that.
Lena, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that's really...
Sure. So when we use the terms personalized and individualized learning, and then we added differentiation into that also, there's a lot of body of work around those terms, and there are sort of subtle nuances that that sort of put people in directions of what their mental model of those terms mean. And so when we use them in the strategic plan, one of the things that we thought was really important was that we come to a Clayton definition of what those mean to us. So our curriculum coordinators and our professional development committee are working together to develop those tools so that then every time we use that term within the district, we all know what we're talking about and what's included in that and what we're not including in it.
Okay. That's great. That makes sense. And then I also wanted to ask about so back in the report that we got in September of 2020, we talked about perspective and disconnect, and then the discipline, the perception versus reality. And I know that we're in COVID, so it's been a little bit different, especially as kids haven't been in the buildings. But I was wondering, I guess the affinity groups that we've created are kind of the answer to that perspective and disconnect. That was the way that I was reading it. And then the discipline, the perception versus reality. Do we know where, I guess, where we're going with that, or I guess that I was just kind of curious as to an update with where things are with that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So at earlier in the year, when we started looking at the equity audit data and then the discipline data, one thing that stood out to us was that, and Mr. Poole, jump in here if I don't explain this correctly, was basically there was this idea that based in the equity audit and the survey results that came back was that educators felt that they had created an equitable teaching and learning environment in their classroom, but perceived consequences to be unequal or inequitable.
Right.
But then when we looked at the discipline data, it was actually, the way that, or the types of discipline referrals that were coming in were coming also in disproportionately. So there was a difference between the perception that, a classroom community was an equitable place, and that overall people felt like at the classroom level, students were being treated equitably when it came to discipline, but the types of discipline referrals that we were receiving really didn't reflect that. They were already reflecting a disproportionality across racial subgroups. So after doing a little bit more work around all of that, I think some of the work that can be done is one related to documentation and improving documentation, just in terms of its consistency, and not necessarily consistently that in like what's getting reported, but it's more just like the methods and how things are getting captured, and making sure that data is a little bit more user friendly. So that way buildings can have even more meaningful conversations about how people are navigating classroom management and community building. I think the piece that attaches to that is restorative practices. And in my audit of restorative practices, what I found was that the good news is that, our building administrators have a really strong understanding of what restorative justice and restorative practices are. But I think their application is a bit uneven across the district. And I think that one of our good next steps starting this summer would be to really build capacity across more of the system in terms of building, not just building leaders' capacity, but also teacher leaders' capacity to be able to facilitate restorative conversations when they are needed. The caveat to that is it's really hard to restore something if there's no community to be restored. And so I think system-wide, we need to just have an even more intentional and cohesive effort around how we build community and relationships in our classroom so that all students feel welcome. So that way then restorative practices can actually be effective. Because again, it's hard to restore something that doesn't exist. And then I think lastly, similar to what I told Caitlin earlier, I think our students can be tapped for a lot of information that can help us improve in this area. For example, one thing I noticed in the data at the secondary level is students who are repeat offenders when it comes to vaping at school. So really working with our students to find out, especially our repeat offenders, and really thinking through more innovatively and more in a more student-centered way, what are the things that we can do as a system that aren't always punitive, but to really change student behavior. So that way our number of incidences related to this actually decreases and we have fewer students who are repeating the same mistake. And so I think our students can be great resources for us and how we can come up with better strategies to change behavior and come up with more individualized and personalized support plans for students who we know who are struggling and continuing to struggle with certain behaviors over a duration of time, not even just one school year, but even from middle school to high school. How do we help them be more successful and not repeat the same types of behaviors that are disruptive to their learning and to the learning of the students around them?
And I think to add on to that, from a professional learning standpoint, as we analyze data and numbers and things like that, especially in our sessions where we're doing professional learning and professional development, that mirroring the story behind the data. So, trying to get our staff as a whole to see data points actually taking place. And a lot of that comes down to that learning piece of understanding and humanize each person's experience. If you've never been the only Black male in the classroom, you don't know what it feels like to be the only Black male in the classroom. So how a teacher communicates with me is going to hit a little different than everyone else. So it's, a lot of the learning that we're doing within our sessions really mirrors around kind of a case study model. Like, here's a situation. This is how this kid responded. This is how they were feeling. This is how the teacher responded in this situation. How can we work and problem solve through that? So when we're doing our professional learning, it's creating a kind of a framework to really view things and pretty much looking at the case study and, fitting it within the framework and what did we do wrong and how could we, improve. And then if this is the normal, interaction between this teacher and this student, what does that data look like? And how is that data manifesting itself in those numbers? And it's getting the teachers to see it and the staff to see how they're contributing to the numbers, because everyone looks like, well, we got disproportionate data. Well, we're suspending more kids. Well, okay, one, a principal does suspending. Two, a teacher sends the kid to the office. Three, there's a situation where there's a disconnect where it's not being handled in the classroom when the kid is being sent to the office. So how are we looking at the situation from, the initial impact to, hey, you're suspended, or you've got detention, or you've got this. So really breaking down unique situations. An interesting thing is a lot of the case studies that we've looked at in our professional learning are stories from students and parents of things that have actually happened. And I remix them a little bit, of course, for the sake of, confidentiality and things like that. But these are actual things that are happening in people's classrooms. And I think I'm getting to, the bottom of that a lot. I've done a lot of kind of just coaching and consulting, with a lot of teachers and a lot of staff and principals to where, one good thing is, hey, there's a disconnect here. I don't know where the disconnect is. Help me problem solve through this. So actually going through those situations and seeing, okay, boom, might be the one place that we messed up. How could we have done this differently? And walking through it. So, really coach them individually and trying to get to the root of this is a kid's experience. Let's humanize it. And let's learn the proper problem solving communication skills that we haven't been using because we don't know exactly what that kid's experience is. So.
Thank you. It sounds like you guys have that under control, and I assume that we'll start to see some positive movement and change in that area. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Stacy, any comments or questions?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Cameron, for putting this together. I mean, that was a really impressive presentation, and all of you did such a great job contributing to it. So thank you. I did want to touch on a couple points I thought were particularly impressive and important. And Caitlin and Amy slightly did mention this too. I love the affinity groups that you're forming because, we so often talk about our students having a sense of belonging, but I think that's equally as important for our teachers and our parents in the community. And so I was really happy to see that you launched those for the Asian and Hispanic parents and teachers. But I did wonder, have you thought about doing those affinity groups for students as well? Caitlin, I know brought that up. And then I wonder if there are other marginalized groups you've thought doing that with, like LGBTQ teachers and parents, or Jewish and Muslim teachers, parents, students. So I think that the idea is great, again, because it all ties back to that sense of belonging for everyone. So thank you for getting that started. And I also wanted to ask, or I guess just comment that I know Robin has done such a good job revamping the gifted identification process. So thank you for that, so that we are identifying more students of color that deserve to be a part of that program. But I also want to make sure on the other end of the spectrum that the process is also equitable in identifying students that may need a 504 plan or an IEP to be successful in school as well. And because, teachers are often the ones who recognize, even maybe more than parents, where students are struggling. So I just want to make sure we also on that end of the spectrum are identifying kids so that they also can be as successful as possible.
I'm glad that you brought that up. That is something that Megan Margero, the gifted coordinator, and I have been looking at very closely and have identified it as an area where we do want to continue to monitor that, because we do know there are twice exceptional students in our school district. And I can't remember all of the numbers off the top of my head, but even when we are going through the screening process and then those initial individual evaluation steps after the initial screening, we work closely with the building level counselors to ensure that we are applying all of the accommodations that are needed, not just for our students with IEPs, but also our students who have 504s or might even be in the process of being considered for a 504 and who are in the review process, and really making sure that we're implementing those accommodations with fidelity. And then also we have two other kind of stopgaps in the identification process. One is the data team meetings, where a building team meets with me and with Megan to look at all the data, and we make our initial set of recommendations around students who have met the criteria, but also ensuring that the scores that they are seeing, do they feel like they're reflective of a student's talent, and are there any other learning needs that we feel like may have gotten in the way of it being an accurate snapshot of that student's skill and potential. And so we have that in place. And then the other piece that we have in place is teacher advocacy. So before we make the final decisions, we give teachers in the buildings and the grade levels an opportunity to advocate for students who they have observed to have traits that we often associate with giftedness. So just in case, we did not get it onto our radar, that there's another opportunity for other educators and practitioners who service the child to advocate for them to make sure that they are getting another look. So those are some other things we've put into the process to ensure that we're really looking at every student in a lot of different ways.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. All right, Gary, want to try again? Uh-oh. So you went on mute. You went on mute again, Gary. We started talking and then all of a sudden you went to mute. I can see that you're muted. Try it.
I'm not really
No.
sure why.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I've like tweaked every setting that I can think of here. Sorry about that. I won't belabor it. Great presentation. Cameron, I just would say, if you would let us know how that 14-day challenge we can participate in and tie into that, I would love that. So thank you all for everything.
Will do.
Thanks, Gary, and thank you to the team. You guys did a great job. I don't know if I have any questions because I think we've had a great conversation and probably my questions have been answered. But I think I have 3 comments. The first comment is, it goes back to Jason's comment on equity policy. So UCity just passed an equity policy, as did Maplewood Richmond Heights. So if we're looking at an overall equity policy, there are other districts. Kirkwood's looking at it right now. So just something to think about, right? I mean, just not that we don't want to infuse equity in everything that we do, but there are 2 neighboring or close to neighboring districts that have done that. Second, I will wonder out loud, Panorama has some great diversity, equity, and inclusion modules for students, in a kind of the new module. I guess I wonder if we might want to use those, some for staff, some for community. I've looked at the questions. I think they're really good. They could give us some great information on diversity, equity, inclusion. And then finally, I hope as we move forward that we focus both on kind of what's not working, but what's also working. And we think about the bright spots and what we can scale up, right? Because there are always going to be some things that are working. And I think just as human beings, sometimes it's easier if you have a mix of both. The things that are working and how you scale them and do better are more of it, as well as what we change to improve. So those are just 3 comments I would have.
Hey, Joe, do you have any background information on those policies, like from UCity and Maplewood?
I can send them to you if you want, Jason, or send you the one. I mean, what do you mean background information? Just
like the origin, how they were. What was the discussion around it? Like, what was the discussion around it? We know that what happened last summer helped expedite this process to get the policy, right? But what was the discourse around it to put one together? So
I think the discourse was really around just an extra commitment around kind of equity. And Maplewood Richmond Heights, theirs was probably 6 months or a year ago. So, I mean, theirs is not, UCity's was like last month. So, I mean, there's a little, just noting that there's a little, but they're pretty similar. I've seen them both. As a matter of fact, I was at the UCity board meeting when they passed it last month. So I think it's just a commitment, an overall commitment. Again, it's not to say that it's all in one place, but it's really to re-emphasize the commitment of the district to all things equity.
Cameron, what do you think about that, Cameron?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if those are available on the website. I'd like to take a look, and just kind of, see, how it matches up, with what we're doing. If we're already doing something and it's already aligned, what the next step for that would be. So is that on their website?
Yes, for the UCity one. I'm not sure about the Maplewood one, but I could also send you the UCity one if you want, but it should be on the website.
Yeah, that would be perfect.
Yep.
Okay, awesome.
All right. Awesome discussion, awesome presentation. Thank you all. We really appreciate it. So we are going to move to we have 4 policies, a first reading of 4 policies. I think Robin gets the first 3, and then Mary Jo gets the 4th. So the first one is the first reading of policy JCB, which is transfers within the district. Robin, you're up.
Great. Thank you. So yes, policy JCB has to do with transfers within the district. MSBA released an updated version of this policy to reflect changes that were brought about by House Bill 604. And so this updated policy focuses on transfers within the school district if the school district were to ever become unaccredited. So basically what the new law states is that if a student is going to a school in an unaccredited school district and the school that the child is in has an APR that would be consistent with being unaccredited, that child could request to the school district to be transferred to a school within the district with an APR that would be consistent with an accredited school. And if that is not an option, then the student's family can apply to DESE to have DESE reassign the student to a different school district. So again, this would only come into play if this new part would only come into play if the whole entire school district of Clayton were to become unaccredited.
All right. I'm sorry, anything else, Robin?
Not on JCB.
Okay. Stacy, any questions or comments? Okay. Amy, any questions or comments? Kim, any questions or comments? Jason, any questions or comments?
No.
Thank you. Gary, any questions or comments?
No.
Caitlin, any questions or comments? I'm sorry, Caitlin, do you have any questions or comments?
Oh, no.
Okay, sorry. And David, any questions or comments? Okay, and I don't think I do either. So thank you. You can move on to the next one, the policy JCC, transfer outside the district.
All right, so policy JCC talks about transfers outside the district. MSBA updated this policy also to reflect the changes brought about due to House Bill 604. And this bill addresses students' abilities to transfer out of an unaccredited school district. So if there is not a school within an unaccredited district that a student can transfer to, then as I said a few seconds ago, the student can apply to DESE to transfer to a school in an accredited district with an APR that score that's consistent with the classification of accreditation, and that school district would have to be located in the same or an adjoining county, or an approved charter school located in the same or adjoining county.
Gotcha. Thank you. David, any questions or comments? Okay. Caitlin, any questions or comments?
No.
Thank you. Jason, any questions or comments?
Yeah, I got a comment. So on page, what is it? Page 3, first paragraph, the introduction paragraph. So I was reading it, it reads, so I'll read it out loud. The school district of Clayton provides an excellent education to students within the boundaries of the district, near the students' homes and families, and therefore does not encourage or support transfers outside the district except in the following situations. Now I was reading that, and I think it I read it a couple of times, but I think it hit me a different way. So I understand what we're trying to say here. We're trying to say we have a great district, we provide a great education, but it's kind of tone deaf in a way. And it's tone deaf because I think about kids who are transferring from their district, a different district, and where, they're coming because the school district isn't great and it's in their neighborhood, right? And so they're traveling from that community to this community. And it doesn't take into consideration on how Clayton was built, what the restrictions were on people who are of color to be involved by buying houses, living in this community. So it just kind of hit me a little bit differently, and maybe because I'm just highly cognizant right now when it comes to, being treated unequally. but that kind of hit me a little differently. Does anyone have any feedback about my interpretation of that paragraph?
Where is it, Jason? Again, tell me which.
So yeah, so
referring to the first sentence of the policy. Is that right, Jason?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
What if we just struck the middle part of that sentence and said provides an excellent education to students and doesn't encourage or support transfers outside the district?
Yeah, exactly.
Does that make sense? I think that might capture what you're articulating.
I think so, but I want to make sure everyone else is on board. I mean, this is just kind of how my opinion, but it just, we're trying to be,
it does take into more, by striking the middle part, it does kind of take into more account all the different types of enrollment programs we currently run.
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. And this talked about homeless students also, right? Homeless and foster care, right? Didn't it say? Yeah. All right. So another question I had was, it talks about homeless students and foster care students, and it talks about their school of origin, sending them back there essentially. Who determines their school of origin if you are a foster kid child or a homeless student? Like, what determines?
So there's a process in place. It's called a bid meeting. It's best interest determination. And so if a student is in the custody of Children's Division, we have a joint meeting between their caseworker, any of the other kind of third-party providers that might be supporting that child, including sometimes their foster parent is also involved, or pre-adoptive parents might also be involved. And then there's representation from both school districts. And so there's actually a protocol that the team goes through for a student who is in the foster care system that talks about kind of what the student's goals, personal goals are, what the programs look like in the two different school districts. They take into consideration how long a student has been going to a particular school. They also look at what the students' learning needs are, like if they have an IEP or some other social emotional needs, and looking at the two programs to see which one they think will be a better fit. And then the team decides which one will be the best placement. And if the placement ends up being not the school, depending on which direction it goes, ultimately what often happens is that the cost for transportation is usually split across the entities that are involved.
Yeah, so when
it's a similar process for students who are qualified for McKinney-Vento.
And this is one of our Clayton policies, right? This is a Clayton policy, correct?
The whole thing, or just this one paragraph?
This one paragraph.
This one paragraph actually is in alignment with McKinney-Vento.
Okay.
Which is the Federal Protection Act for students who qualify for homelessness.
Gotcha. Okay, so because the way I read this also, it kind of, it's almost like we don't want to deal with you, so we're gonna send you back to somewhere where, based on how many years you've spent in school there, like we're gonna let them deal with you.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, so there's a very formalized process in place. Actually, I have a bid meeting tomorrow to help determine with the team the best placement for a child. So in my experience, prior to coming to Clayton, I've seen it go in both directions. There's not really a hard and fast kind of pattern. It really just depends on what the individual student's need is. And they take into a lot of consideration, how long they've been in the current placement, how long they've been at that current school, what are the imminent needs of that student, and what their hopes and dreams and goals are for their K-12 experience, and then figuring out which building or which district is going to best serve those needs.
Got it. And then one last question about that. So has this been a part of our audit process to see if there is a disparity in a certain ethnic group that gets the displacement, or is the one involved in this most often?
For McKinney-Vento or for foster care?
I think both. I just both in general.
Well, in the time that I've been in the school district, I believe we've only had, I think, one student in care each school year. Yes, and one of the students ultimately was placed in the district that the foster family was living in. And then tomorrow is another determination that I'm not sure what the outcome will be. I have not run the racial demographics on our families who are McKinney-Vento, but I will say that the transitional housing piece certainly makes their situations very volatile, in the sense of our social workers are in constant communication with them to make sure that transportation and other services are as seamless as possible.
Gotcha. And for me, it's not just race, by the way. It's also socioeconomics. People get caught up in the mix. Decisions are made based on whatever biases they may have sometimes. Although I'm sure we all try to be on our best when we come to making decisions. But I'm always concerned about folks in these programs, because they often get shipped out and bounced around. So I want to make sure that they're being handled appropriately.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, and that's exactly why we have the bid process in place, is to make sure that they are getting a very equitable consideration in terms of what is going to be in the best interest of their students.
All right, thanks, appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason. Gary, any comments or questions? Okay, thank you. Kim, any comments or questions? Thank you. Amy, any comments or questions? Thank you. Stacy, any comments or questions? I don't have any comments or questions, but I do want to say, Jason, I appreciate your comment about the first sentence. I think that was good to strike that middle part. I saw that too, so I think that's good. Okay, so then Robin, you get one more. 6.03, policy JECA, eligibility to enroll.
All right, so JECA, there were two major changes to this. The first change that MSBA made was to update it so that it was in compliance with Senate Bill 306. And that basically allowed for remote registration for families who are moving to Missouri due to military orders. So it makes the enrollment process for those students a little bit easier. And then the second part that was updated was basically it took out the piece that was about setting tuition and has put that piece into a different policy, a new one that Mary Jo is going to talk about, policy DFI.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Stacy, any comments or questions?
Yes, I actually have two. On the bottom of page 9, what's highlighted about when we're talking about the removal, and it says the district may exclude students from programs for failure to pay tuition after they're notified and given a reasonable amount of time to pay the district. When it says reasonable amount of time, is that something that is a fixed amount of time? Like, do we have something like within 30 days, or is that subjective? That just seemed very vague to me.
So families who pay tuition have options on how they pay. And so oftentimes families can opt for a month-to-month piece. And then Mary Jo, do you want to speak to some of the historical things that have been put into place when families were not on pace to be meeting their tuition payments on time?
Yeah, typically we work with them if they get behind in their payments, and then we'll try to come up with a new payment structure. So we've had a few instances where it's gone into the next school year, but typically we can figure out a plan to make it work throughout the current school year. So.
Okay, thanks. And then also at the top of that same page, at the top of page 9, number 8, referring to the students in the VIC program, that whole section was about the district's options for enrollment. And a couple of them, like employees' children, it said, which I think was number 2, that those students are considered resident students. And another one, I think number 3, are VIC students not considered resident students as well? I thought they were.
No, students are considered resident for a collection of state aid. That's the reason they're called resident. So if you're a VIC student, we're receiving funding from VIC. If you're a resident student, we're receiving funding from the state. So.
Okay, so in terms of state aid, they're not. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy. Amy, any comments or questions? Thank you. Kim, any comments or questions? Thank you. Gary, any comments or questions?
I mean, just to follow up on that, Mary Jo, there's no other distinction in terms of resident or other than that state aid purpose, right? Is that what you're saying?
Right. It's just to classify so that we're not, in a sense, you would be double dipping. We would be getting money from the state. The state would also be paying the city, and then the city would be paying us. So we have internal classifications for students, when we do the enrollment reports. So even though students of employees of children are considered resident, we still classify them as employees' children on our reports that we give to you. So that's truly just a state aid kind of definition.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Gary. Jason, any comments or questions? I think you're on mute, Jason.
Oh, I don't have any.
Okay, thank you. Caitlin, any comments or questions? Thank you. David, any comments or questions? Thank you. I don't have any comments or questions. So
I actually had one, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, so I just, and excuse my ignorance, but I know it says that if there are military, students of military transfers, we give them 10 days to prove residency. I just want to make sure that's an adequate enough time, and they might be in temporary housing for 30 days unless they're, I mean, is 10 days really enough time for somebody to show proof of residency that's getting transferred from out of state by the US government? I didn't think they moved that quickly.
That is an excellent question. I am not sure. We don't have a ton of military families transferring in, or we haven't had any recently.
Okay.
But my guess is that given how small we are and how close the proximity we have to the enrollment process, that, if a family, we're in constant contact with our families as they enroll, that if they were running into any issues, that we could probably work out a plan if it needed to extend beyond 10 days.
Okay, great.
Thank you. So thanks, Robin. So I think we're moving Mary Jo on to you. 6.04 policy DFI setting the tuition rate.
Alrighty. As Robin said, this is a policy that was added because we removed the setting of the tuition from JECA. So this policy covers how we set the tuition on an annual basis for non-resident and resident students who are not otherwise entitled to free education to attend the district or our district programs. And so there are some sections of this policy that were added that were not in JECA before. And so those sections that I have read, changes to, where it's in red, those are actually my recommended changes that we did have our attorney review, because we do not set tuition rates based on what the MSBA assumed we would do, which is cost of educating the student. So we typically set tuition in those areas at a market rate. So we look at other districts in the area, private schools, or other competing markets that we have for that specific student, and then we set our rate based on that. And so the attorney approved the changes and said they were fine. So those were actually, the reason there's no other changes in here is because this is a new policy, and so the red changes are actually our changes.
Great, thanks, Mary Jo. David, any comments or questions on this one?
Just a question, Mary Jo, when I read this, it looks to be that I don't see that it would produce a material difference from what we've done in the past. Is that a fair assessment?
Yep, it's aligning exactly to what we're currently doing.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm good. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Caitlin, any comments or questions?
No.
Thank you. Jason, any comments or questions?
No.
Thank you. Gary, any comments or questions? Thank you. Kim, any comments or questions? Thank you. Amy, any comments or questions?
So my only comment, and I'm sure some people don't agree with me, but I've said this before, is that what bothers me about this is that we charge a lot of money for the tuition, the tuition kids that come. And a lot of times it doesn't. So in a private school, a lot of times they will give out scholarships for kids that can't afford to come into the private school. There's scholarship opportunities, but we don't, I guess it's the amount that we charge, and I know that it is what it is, but it's prohibitive for families that, that might want to come to Clayton, but they just can't afford it. And I guess what bothers me about it is that we have no mechanism in place right now for a type of scholarship, possibly. And I know it wouldn't be through us that we can't do it, but I don't know if that's something that we could maybe talk to.
The Clayton Education Foundation.
Yeah, the Clayton Education Foundation, or or there's other opportunity, I guess, for us to discuss that, to see if we could somehow sponsor or facilitate that at some level, help coordinate it.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely see what our potential options around there. I mean, we have actually explored some other outside entities looking at doing scholarship programs. And so, yeah, that's definitely something we can explore.
Thanks, Amy. Stacy, any comments or questions?
Yeah, I have a couple. I'm just curious why, of all the tuitions here, summer school was the only one that specified the price. And so I'm just wondering why, and do we want to be locked into that in writing in a policy when we weren't for the others? That's my first question.
Yeah, if you do that summer school as a cost per pupil, it is a very expensive, like credit amount, basically, if you look at it that way. And what we were finding was students who really needed to be in the summer program, who were a tuition student, it was cost prohibitive for them. So the families were already upset that they had paid, the costs for the tuition through the year. And then we were asking for about $5,000 more for a summer program. And so years ago, when we started having students that needed to be in the summer program, we basically set it at the 500. I'm not quite sure how Whiteout got $50 difference. That I'm not positive, but basically we just wanted to set a minimal rate to encourage the students who really needed to be in the program to come. And so we've just kept it at that flat rate the entire time. So there really isn't any intent to change it. These families are already paying a significant tuition amount during the school year, and we just want to encourage them to come, but there needed to be a tuition charge for the summer. And so we set it minimally.
Let me ask you a question around the summer school. Summer school at one time was about, there's been an evolution in summer school, if I'm not mistaken. Kids used to go to summer school because they were not doing as well during the school year in a particular class for whatever reason. So before, when kids used to go to summer school and there were kids they were paying tuition, did they have to pay that high amount, $5,000? And it was recommended for them to graduate or move on to the next level or to get their GPA out. Did they have to pay that at one time?
vaguely remember when I don't know if we've always had tuition students attending summer school, but I do know it was about 12 years ago or so that this topic came up. And when we presented what the cost was going to be, the student declined enrollment, and they really wanted the student to enroll. And so we decided to set a flat rate. I don't think we've ever charged anyone. When we needed to, it was cost prohibitive. So.
And are the rules the same though if you're failing a class or if you didn't do good in a class and you want to go to summer school and take that class? Is that still a thing, Sean? Do kids do that still? Is that still a thing?
Part of our summer programs, there is remediation as part of our summer programs. And so some students are recommended for our summer programs. So that way they get additional supports to shore up some of the skills that they might need. And so I would say that we always try to do whatever's possible to make sure the kids are getting what they need. And we're not going to make anything prohibitive for students if they need it. So, I guess I was not aware of that situation 12 years ago, but we will do anything possible to make sure any student that's in our classrooms are getting what they need.
Gotcha. All right, cool, thanks.
Stacey, did you have other questions?
I did, and I'm going to apologize in advance if I'm opening up a can of worms here. But when we started the tuition program for non-resident students, I know there was a financial reason to do so. Was the intent to continue this program for as long as we have? And do we still see the benefit of continuing it? I mean, we are the only public school that does this, and I know there are pros and cons, but I'm just wondering if it's still fulfilling the need that it was originally intended for.
I would say no. The original intent, it was started when the VEST program was starting to phase out.
Right. So we were going to be losing money. Right.
We were going to be so that it was intended to grow the number of students to offset the loss in BIC revenue. And so we have, at one point we did have around 70 tuition students. That was probably the highest that we ever enrolled. We're down, I have it in my notes. I think it's like 30, under 30 students now. So the revenue is not as substantial as it was in the past. But it was done for purely, revenue generating purpose. And so I don't, at this point we had to stop back in 2008, 9, we had to stop enrollment because of the statutory tuition students, and then our resident students started growing. So that's how we gradually started to decline in the tuition students. We have space now. We're starting to try to accept more. We haven't been advertising like we used to do when we had that many, but it's kind of at the board's discretion as to how they want to operate that program.
Okay. I guess, not right now, but I guess at some point we should maybe discuss the future of the program and why we're still doing it, and if we need to be and if we want to be.
Yeah, we need to set the rate as well. So, that's typically when that question will come up.
Okay.
So maybe what we need to do, I'll take note of that, Stacey, and I think that would be another conversation beyond this policy, and then we can facilitate a conversation with the board around that.
Thank you.
And just so everybody knows, because it's in Mary Jo's thing, tuition revenue is projected at $456,900. So it's down, but it's still almost $57,000 in the budget.
Yeah, it used to be over $1 million when we
used to be a lot.
Yeah,
it used to be over $1 million.
I think the thing we have to be cognizant of is there's a certain fixed cost for operating the classroom, right? And so, let's say it's 15 kids and you're sitting at 13. There's no real cost to Clayton for filling those 2 seats. It's purely upside to our budget. I think, letting those seats go empty would be, I think would be a missed opportunity. So, I agree. This probably isn't the place to debate it, but I'll be suited up because I chase the dollars and I like the revenue for the district.
All righty. Stacey, any other comments or questions? And I don't have any comments or questions. So thanks, Mary Jo. But you're still up because now we're moving to the budget planning.
And I'll have one comment on David's comment. There is obviously a demand. So for the tuition seats. So, all righty, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so the adoption of the annual budget is part of the board's fiduciary responsibility. The conservative and prudent approach to planning by Clayton's boards of education has a historical trademark of the district. These decisions have made the district fiscally stable and has placed the district in a strong financial position that allows us to be responsive to unforeseen circumstances. The past year is a great example of how strong the financial stability of the district has allowed us to pivot during this COVID pandemic and support the technology needs for virtual learning, ensure safe learning environments for our students and staff, and support our partnership we've had with the Center of Clayton. So the formal budget development process for the next school year begins tonight with the framework. This framework maps out the district's overall strategy for the creation of the budget. Tonight, I will present the budget framework as a hypothesis and the variables that are used to create the hypothesis. These variables are based on an overall macro fiscal strategy regarding revenue projections and proposed expenditure plans within specific departments, such as school buildings, facility maintenance, and categories such as salaries and benefits. Tonight is also an opportunity for the board to ask questions, gain understanding, and provide input that will be used to finalize the more micro budget document that is presented to the board in a draft form and final form in the spring. So I apologize, I did update my presentation because I left off the most important thing, which is the actual graph that represents the hypothesis, the projections. So the 5-year projection model is used to test the variables within the hypothesis. So the variables are continually updated as information is received. So the hypothesis, or the graph, is projecting a $3.4 million surplus and a 52% fund balance for that for the 2021 school year. This is due to revenue variables that increase 2% and expense variables that project the district or increase approximately 2.75%. It also projects the district to continue to build the fund balance over the next 5 years, which is depicted by the light blue line. And then with us reaching the balanced budget in 25-26 school year as depicted by the meeting of the blue and orange lines at the top right-hand corner of the graph. So when we look at the revenue variables that support the hypothesis, we know that changes in enrollment drive staffing. So as a result, enrollment projections are updated as the budget is developed. Today is actually the official count day, and so we use the enrollment from today to project forward. And so we will present the enrollment projections to the board at the March 10th meeting. So statistical calculations in that document take into consideration significant increases in resident enrollment through the 2017-2018 school year, resulting in projections that show enrollment growth. However, actual enrollment over the past 3 years has remained flat and has indicated that we're in an enrollment bubble. So administration is currently reviewing staffing needs for 2021 school year and will finalize after the enrollment projections are completed. Voluntary student transfer program will continue to enroll siblings for the 21-22 school year, and we anticipate 5 new students based on the terms of the extension agreement. However, 24 students will graduate. This represents approximately 170 total VST students and a decrease in tuition from this program of approximately $97,000. As a resident enrollment bubble at the elementary level declines, opportunity for additional tuition students can be considered. So currently, we know there are 4 tuition students who will graduate, and we have 2 pending students for the next school year. They're waiting for us to set the tuition rate. So please keep in mind, we are very conservative in placing the students to ensure we review the normal projected grade level progression, because growth often results in later grade levels that can then exceed class sizes at those levels. Revenues from students enrolled in the district as statutory tuition students is actually projected to end due to the terms outlined in the Memorandum of Understanding. The students are still enrolled in the district. However, there is no more revenue that will be billed to the sending districts. So this represents a reduction of $95,000 in revenue. We are not anticipating any significant changes in state funding at this time since the district is hold harmless. However, federal funding does have some unknowns. For the 2021 school year, the district received substantial federal funding for COVID relief through the CARES Act, which is the federal act. Currently, this funding totals $382,000, and that has been used towards technology, PPE supplies, staffing, and a portion of our bipolar ionization system. We are anticipating another $156,000, but we have not received final details on that yet. And we do not anticipate any other future payments beyond this, but we don't know, what will happen over the next 6 months or so. Further, school districts across the St. Louis region are working to lobby the Missouri Commissioner of Education to work with the federal government to ensure a hold harmless model of funding to title funds. That is one of our most significant portions of federal funding. The title funds support some of our most struggling students. Due to the pandemic, the ability for all families to receive free meals was automatic, and that has resulted in fewer families completing their free and reduced meal applications. So this application is a data source to collect census poverty data. And this challenge of reduced census poverty data is a stark contrast to the reality some of our families currently face as the pandemic has reduced many families' incomes. So if a hold harmless funding model is not adopted, the district could lose a significant portion of our title funds for next year. The first half of this fiscal year saw interest rates above 2%. It was really nice. However, due to the pandemic and the Federal Reserve reducing the Fed fund rates back down to levels from 2008, we are earning about 0.04% on our long-term investments. So we just received around $30 million in the past month. So we continue to research investment options to maximize these earnings, for payments throughout the year as best we can. So new developments are continuously monitored because they are our primary increase in tax revenue. The Clarendale of Clayton, which is on the corner of Hanley and Clayton Road, although not completed, should be included in the tax rolls as being under roof. That is the point that we can include them on the tax rolls for commercial property. And this will add approximately $400,000 in new tax revenue to the district for 2021. The new Bank of America on the corner of Forsyth, the Pearl condominiums, which are across from the high school, and Forsyth Point are also included as revenue in future years as they are projected to be completed. Several other developments, including the Boulevard South, Resident Inn, AC Hotel at the old police station, and Beamerson Place are all in the conceptual phases and are awaiting approval, and therefore we are conservative and we do not include those in projections. We did receive word that the new Centene Tower has filed their certificate of substantial completion for the first phase of their construction, and they will receive their 40% abatement for the 21 tax year. This represents approximately $700,000 from the district in abated revenue. So please, I want everyone to remember that their abatement for the second phase was contingent on beginning construction by December 31st, which did not occur. So in addition to that, their abatement on both phase 1 and phase 2 is contingent on the completion of the construction of the auditorium, which was actually in phase 4. And that was announced in December that it would also be put on hold. So the auditorium must be completed by the end of 2024, or Centene will lose the property tax abatement even for the new tower in the first phase that they are getting this year that's already constructed. There's no what they call a clawback provision, however, that will recoup any of the abatement from 21 through 24. Once they have that, that is gone. But I am anticipating that the city will most likely revise the development agreement once Centene determines their next step. And I don't know if the city will be forthcoming on that, but if there's anything we might want in that negotiations, it might be something to speak to the mayor about. Protested assessed values continue to remain a challenge for all of St. Louis County, resulting in fluctuations in assessed value data and tax payments that cause significant fluctuations in our revenue trends. So 2019, the district was able to recoup $1.2 million in protested taxes. And if you go back to that graph, we had a nice spike that year beyond the tax levy. However, trends normally have us paying back $1 million in tax settlements throughout the year. Oddly enough, in that year, we did not pay back anything. So there was no recoupment collected in the current school year. So this resulted in a reduction for this year. Unlike last year, though, this year we are also paying back taxes, and there's about $600,000 we've already paid back this year, but I don't have enough information at this time to determine whether or not we'll be able to recoup those. Because of how the formula works, there has been instances where we were unable to do so. So since I don't have enough information to determine that, we are being conservative and we're not including any recoupment in the projections, but I should have more information in April and be able to update the board at that point in time. Regarding legislative changes, as Dr. Doherty mentioned, the Senate Education Committee did hold a hearing last week on Tuesday on Senate Bills 23, 25, and 55 regarding voucher tax credits, charter school expansions, virtual instruction, school board recall elections, and homeschool participation in sports. These bills were voted out of committee and combined into Senate Bill 55, which basically is an omnibus bill and basically can be brought to the Senate floor at any time for debate. So all of this new bill will impact, can definitely impact revenue for the district, and we will continue to monitor and work with our legislators and our lobbyists. So that is the revenue variables. I don't know, Joe, if you want me to stop and ask questions at this time or just go ahead through the whole thing. It's up to you.
No, just go ahead through the whole thing, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we'll look at the expenditure variables. They're pretty straightforward. So with salary increases, that represent 60% of the operating budget, or $35.6 million. 2021 is the final year of a 2-year salary agreement. So administration will begin salary discussions with teacher representatives in February. A 2% salary increase is estimated for the budget purposes, but the actual budget, when we present it, will be determined through salary discussions with teacher representatives. And the final budget is expected to include salaries based on the final approved salary schedule changes and savings from attritions, which I'm expecting to be similar to the last 2 years of probably 1 to 1.5%, somewhere in there. Classified staff are projected separately since they don't have significant savings from attrition, and so they are budgeted at a 2% increase. Retirement and benefits represent 19% of the operating budget, or $11.2 million. And 2020 did end the year with growth in the medical self-insurance fund, but because of COVID and uncertainties and bills, because people couldn't have procedures done, and the need to continue to build the fund balance, we did increase the health premiums 5%, and we budget 5% moving forward. So there are increases in benefits as we move forward of 8%. School and department budget represent 8% or $5 million of the operating budget and will be established through the zero-based approach. District leaders will ensure our resources are allocated to programs that support our vision and goals. Technology and capital improvement plans represent about 3% or $1.6 million of the operating budget. The TIP funds will increase 2% for CPI or Consumer Price Index for a budget of $649,000, along with an additional $10,000 contingency reserve for technology expenditures. And because that was the 4th year of the 3-year technology plan, we do need to bring that back to the board for review, and then we can make determinations if there's any changes in that. The CIP funds will be increased 2% for CPI for a budget of $905,000, along with an additional $35,000 budget for classroom furniture and a $50,000 contingency. Other expenses, which I provide some detail on the slide, represent 10% of the operating budget, or $6 million, and they're fairly fixed. And so we do just increase those at 2% for CPI moving forward. So to recap the variables, revenue is projected to increase at about 2%, primarily due to the new construction of the Clarendelle. Expenses are projected to increase approximately 2.75, mainly due to increase in CPI and salaries and benefits. And because of the successful passing of Proposition E and administration being intentional to align our finances with our strategic goals, these variables support the hypotheses that the district is projected to have approximately $3.4 million surplus and a 52% fund balance in the 21-22 school year. So the next steps will include a budget check-in in April, where, as I mentioned, I provide more information on the revenue streams, and then we'll present the draft in May and the final budget in June. So after hearing the hypotheses and the revenue and expense variables that were used to create the hypotheses, what are your reactions, questions, and input that you may have?
Thank you, Mary Jo. Appreciate it. Stacy, any comments or questions?
No, just thank you. That was very thorough and really pretty easy to follow and understand. So I appreciate all the work you put into it. Thank you, Mary Jo.
Thanks, Stacy. And my screen has changed orders, so I'm calling people in different orders now. David, any comments or questions?
No worries, Joe. Mary Jo, on taxes, how do we? I know we track and trend, protesting of tax values and such, but how do we handle people that don't pay their taxes? If so, we're going to have people that, we have businesses that don't pay taxes, despite, their obligation to, but then we also have a challenge with, there's a lot of families, Clayton's not immune to the financial impacts of COVID. I know there's a lot of families that have taken pay cuts or furloughs, and I'm just anticipating that, we could see a difference of income as a result of that. Is that something that we've kind of built into, or that you're building into the budget, or is it a wait and see what happens kind of thing? I'm just not sure how you look at it.
Our collection rate is actually anywhere between 97 and 98%. And so we do have that built into the budget. Right now, we are projecting about $13.5 million of protested taxes. So what happens with the protested taxes is they put them in an escrow account and then they release them to us in May after we file a friendly lawsuit. But we do get a report on that in February. So once I receive that report, I can tell whether or not there's a larger amount of delinquent taxes. So as long as they're paid and put in protest, so right now, the way it looks, we're really in line with budget. We're right in line with last year. If we get everything that we collected last year, we will just be right at budget. And last year we had $3.5 million in protested taxes. So it seems like we're in line with last year, but in February, when I get the protested tax report, I will know more. So I'll be able to update the board at that April meeting. But to answer specifically your question, we do project about 3% uncollected.
That's just residential property tax, though, that you do the projections on, right? Not business taxes?
It's residential and commercial.
It is commercial.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
but
the real
not
estate
commercial
taxes.
real estate. I'm talking about like commercial sales tax. And is it all taxes? It's just real estate.
Just real estate. We don't receive any sales taxes from the city.
Thank you. Jason, any comments or questions?
Yeah, good job. That was an excellent presentation. My concerns are always right now how the impacts of COVID, the cost to us. Do we have an actual cost, and do we have even kind of a more alarming projected cost expense that we're kind of afraid of, and how we factor that in. Also. My concern is the fitness center. That's going to continue to be down for a while. I'm always afraid of that cost, and are we behind the scenes discussing a contingency plan? Just a thought. And then third, did we take into account the cost of the strategic plan and ABAR, in particular Cameron's role, on the expense to get this job done? Because it might, to me, this is a pretty ambitious goal. And it just seems like it's going to take more boots on the ground to get this done. That's just kind of based on my read here, that's what I gather.
Regarding the COVID, so I am not projecting any COVID, and I mentioned about the federal revenue. I feel like the COVID is the current school year, not next school year, with the exception of one thing, and I'll mention that in a second. So we have looked at COVID revenue and expenditures, and with the exception of the two items we brought forward for budget revisions already, which is the bipolar ionization system and the expenditures for the Center Clayton, which was about $1 million. I think between the savings and expenditures and the offsets of revenues and stuff, it's kind of netting right now, and the federal revenue that we've received, which is around $500,000. So I think we should be pretty even on the COVID expenses for this school year. So moving forward, you know, depending if we need any additional staffing in the fall, that could be something potentially that might come into play in the fall. The only other thing I am concerned about is the assessed value of the commercial real estate. So assessed value of commercial real estate is assessed based on rental income. And I know rental, you know, a lot of commercial real estate outside of Clayton has been getting vacated. I don't have a good number for Clayton, but if it does start to decline, then those assessed values decline. Most people, if you know the tax rate, you know we can just roll that back up. But we are getting close to our ceiling, our maximum authorized levy, which what would happen then, my assumption, we had never hit it. So I'm not quite sure how the formula will work until we get there, but I think it'll roll into residential, which will increase the residential rate until we hit the ceiling on that one too. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's not a end of the world kind of thing, but it could just cause some concern when we get there.
Gotcha. And Cameron, did you enroll?
Yeah. So related to that, and Sean can talk about that, we do have an extra, I think, $140,000 in the budget for strategic planning needs. And then you also had one other question.
I think it was the center.
Oh, the Center Clayton. So the Center Clayton, I actually have projecting out 5 years with it kind of doing about 100,000 a year going down. So 500,000, 400,000, 300,000 in net operating losses, in addition to our contribution that we already have projected moving forward.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason. Amy, any comments or questions? Thank you, Amy. Caitlin, any comments or questions?
No.
Thank you, Caitlin. Kim, any comments or questions?
Yeah, just a couple. So since we're still on the subject of assessed values, what about for new construction properties? Despite, you know, COVID and the pandemic, a lot of new construction was underassessed, that upon reassessment, they go back and they increase the assessment. So, you know, after they publish, for example, in the St. Louis Business Journal that X property, you know, is valued at X, and then the assessment comes out at 10% of that value. Like, is the county assessor's office now a little bit better organized to go back and chase those reassessed values? What's your take on that? Because I know it was kind of a mess up until, I mean, maybe now still.
I was gonna say, I know on Clayton new construction, they've been pretty aggressive at assessing it high. So I don't know if that's more isolated outside of Clayton. But I mean, the last assessment cycle, Clayton's commercial their average was like 16% increase. And so I know the assessor sees the value of the properties in Clayton and is definitely making sure he's getting those adjusted. And actually the new construction, everything that we have projected based on the information that we get our numbers from the city, from the permits and everything that's issued, they're coming right in line with what we were projecting. So I don't think they're getting assessed as new construction low, not in Clayton at least.
Well, I know they were a few years ago because there's a host of professionals that work on the side protesting those the increases after they catch the mistakes. But maybe I'll see if that still exists and send you the addresses and the examples of the properties.
No, that situation definitely still exists. Okay. However, it was kind of a glitch in the law that the county actually the last couple years have finally succeeded in winning the lawsuits, and they're kind of brought through in batches. And since they finally were successful, they hired outside counsel a few years ago, which they have never done. Okay. And they've inside counsel. And so that's what we're starting to see a turn on that, because what was happening, it was just blanket assessed values getting changed. And
Yes.
they finally have been denying that. And
Good.
that has definitely changed. That's
Good.
been the
so
last.
there has been like positive progress made there, because it was
Yes.
starting to look, you know, like a bad, like
Oh,
a
yes.
political movie of black slush
Yes.
fund in that area. Okay.
Yep.
So then, you know, you talked at the very beginning of your presentation about an enrollment bubble. So when I hear from a financial or economic term bubble, does that mean we expect the bubble to pop at some point? And if so, are we expecting a decrease in enrollment versus the increase that was projected in the plan? And then right after that, you said that you'll be doing an internal assessment, likely with Sean and the other administrators, about what that means for staffing. So can you give us a little more color of what that means? Does that mean hiring freezes or contraction in staffing, or what? What do you do in that case?
Mary Jo, you want to talk about the bubble part, and I can talk about the staffing.
Yeah, I wasn't sure who was going first. So the bubble, actually, when we had the demographer come in and they looked at it, they called it a bubble. So I kind of used the same terminology, and I kind of see it more just like a hill. So yeah, not that something's going to pop. So we rose to a high enrollment, and now we're on the way back down. And so we were having kindergarten classes in the 60s, and we're back down to about 45. So the last few years, you know, it's just been, and so if you're, you know, if you're looking at all three buildings, it's about 45 less students a year every year. And so it's just giving us some space. So we still have some bubbles within the grade levels. Like we still have a fourth grade that's really large. Our freshman year grade at the high school is really big. But like Whiteout's back down to all 200, you know, student class sizes versus 260 in one of their grade levels and stuff. So really, and Sean can talk about the staffing, but a lot of that staffing has just shifted with the classes. So he can talk about that.
Yeah, so what we do is we try to, every year, we look at having intentional meetings with the buildings, especially at the high school and Whiteout. We look at the number of enrollments. We look at shifting numbers in terms of if we need to add additional staffing, or sometimes it's actually reducing staffing. And it's looking at the total number of, you know, needs that we have for class assignments. And like as Mary Jo said, if we look at our class assignments and some of our grade levels at the elementary, there have been instances where we've said, we need to add an additional teacher here. So that way that's more than maybe 3 sections. We might have to do 4 sections, but it's not something that just continues to carry on. We reevaluate it every single year. And there are going to be times when we might want to have connected to our strategic plan, an innovation or something that we want to try in terms of staffing. And one of the things we're putting in place is that if we're going to add additional staffing, then we're going to then add the evaluation of like, how do we know that we're getting the dividends out of this position? How do we know that this is something that we want to continue investing in the future? So it's a natural process every single year when we go through to see what are the enrollments at all of our schools, what are the class sizes in all of our classes. We look at the number of enrollments at the high school at different classes. And sometimes we have to add staffing and sometimes we have to take away. But it's a natural process. But there are times we might want to think of doing something different, but we are going to put a measure in place to make sure that it's paying dividends for us.
Thanks, Kim. Gary, any comments or questions?
No, thanks. Appreciate the report and all the questions. I won't belabor anything from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. And Mary Jo, good job. I don't have any comments or questions. So we are going to move on to our action items. So the first one is 8.01, which is the district academic calendar for the 2021-22 school year. Could we read the motion, Gary, please?
Hopefully you guys can hear me. I move that the Board of Education approve the 2021-2022 district academic calendar as recommended.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Chris, did you want to add any comments before I ask the board if they have any comments or questions?
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to say beyond what we've kind of included there in the proposal, which is just this is a calendar that we're using or calendar that we're moving forward to mirror the current calendar.
Don't collect that. Don't let that number enter, Sandy. I didn't know that. I don't recognize that number. I'm just saying that.
So the calendar for this year, the 2020-2021 school year, was reflected some changes. However, we felt like since we've had such an extraordinary school year, I guess would be a great way to put it, that we really haven't had a chance to experience and evaluate the impact of some of these changes. So we felt like it made sense just to move those forward, keep our fingers crossed, and hope that we get a chance to evaluate what this calendar feels like in what we would consider more ordinary times.
Great, thank you. So any comments or questions from the board?
Yeah, Chris, I know it says that we exceed the minimum number of instructional hours. By how much?
It varies by school. So I can pull that up or provide that information, but I mean, we're exceeding it in terms of equivalent days as opposed to just hours.
And the same, like it's the same amount of days we always kind of exceed it.
Correct. So this calendar it has the exact number of hours that the calendar that the board approved for the 2020-2021 school year. Correct.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Any other comments or questions? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes 7-0. Thank you. Okay, 8.02, safety and security items, solicitation of bids. Gary, will you read the motion, please?
8.02, I move that the Board of Education authorize the solicitation of bids for the first phase safety and building improvements that will take place during the summer of 2021 and authorize the release of committed funds for payment.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Mary Jo, did you want to add anything here before I ask the board if they have any comments or questions?
Yeah, this was kind of hard to write in the document, but I just want kind of everyone to understand the finances associated with this. So this is a phase 1, and then there's a phase 2. The majority of the funding is coming from the sale of the Maryland building, which on our monthly financials shows around $3.2 million. However, the total of both phases with the gender neutral restrooms is over that amount. So when we added the gender neutral restrooms, it exceeded the 3.2 million. So it's about another 750,000 over that. So we will have to ask, if we want all of it done, we will have to ask the board for additional funding above the Maryland funding of about 750,000, which would be over a 2-year time frame. So as we get the bids back, I'll be able to explain it more, but I just want everyone to understand the total scope of the project.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Okay, so any comments or questions on this one?
Just one. Mary Jo, whenever you get that data, can you also kind of do a burn down schedule over that 2-year window so we can see what the cash flow looks like?
Yeah, because we're only going to get bids on the first phase right now, and then we'll just project out on the second phase, so we can do that.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, it's passes 7-0. Thank you. So we're moving on actually to a couple second readings of policies. So this is 8.03, the second reading and approval of policy DC, taxing and borrowing. Gary, will you read this one, please?
8.03, I move that the Board of Education approve the second reading of policy DC, taxing and borrowing as presented.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any comments or questions? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, it passes 7-0. So we're moving on to 8.04, which is the second reading and approval of policy EF, which is food service management.
8.04, I move that the Board of Education approve the second reading of policy EF, food service management as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any comments or questions? All righty, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you. It also passes 7-0. So we are moving on to the consent agenda.
9.01, I move that the Board of Education approve the consent agenda for agenda items 9.02 through 9.04.
Second.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded. Any comments or questions about the consent agenda? All righty, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, it passes unanimously 7-0. Thank you. Okay, we're moving on to the financials, 10.01.
10.01, I move that the Board of Education approve the payment of current expenditures and investments for December 2020 as presented and attached.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any comments or questions?
I have to recuse myself from this vote.
Okay,
So I'll leave and you'll tell me when to come back?
yes.
She doesn't have to actually leave. She just
Okay,
Well, okay.
it's fine.
I'll just abstain. Okay.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, just don't vote. All right. Any comments or questions? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. And I'm noting that Stacy's not voting. She's recusing herself. So this passes 6-0. Thank you. Okay. We're moving on to public comment. And Sean and Chris, do we have any public comment?
Yes, we have 3 public comments this evening. The first public comment is from Betsy Meelan Smith, and she writes, "Welcome, Dr. Patel. I very much look forward to getting to know you better and offer my support to you as you begin to navigate our district. As a parent and community member deeply invested in the work of equity and anti-racism in our district and community, I'm interested in learning more about Dr. Patel's background and experience in anti-racism and equity work, her thoughts on the work already being done here, and her vision for anti-racism in our district as she takes the helm. I was surprised and concerned, based on the district's and BOE's express commitment to racial equity and anti-racism, that there was no mention of Dr. Patel's previous work or plans to continue or build upon the work being done in our district in either the public announcement of her hiring or the letter to the community." Second comment. One second, my screen is not refreshing here. 1 second. Guys will have to bear with me. I just lost the comments here. Sorry, I apologize. My all my Google Suites just not logged me out. Coming back up now.
Chris, do you want me to see if I can pull it up?
No, I've got it right now. I'm back. I apologize for that. The second comment we have this evening is from Adrian Piston. She writes, our family moved to St. Louis from Nashville, Tennessee 5 years ago. We moved to a city rocked by the horror of Michael Brown, a horror that reverberated throughout the nation. It has taken me years to learn about and wrap my head around systemic racism and the travesty it has wrought on this nation. Within the district, my children have told me about several instances where they witnessed undue punishment of their Black and brown peers, something they found confusing and sad. I reported these instances and the principals, to my knowledge, have done a fine job dealing with it. The death of George Floyd this summer was a turning point for me to become more active as a white parent to start the long journey to end systemic racism. I am thrilled that the district has hired Cameron Poole. I find his work to be both inspirational and motivational. The district's move toward equity has inspired me to get more involved with the school system and get to work. Thank you. And our last comment is from Suzanne Whitman. She writes, I first want to thank Sean, Cameron, Robin, and the administrative team for continuing to move forward on issues of equity. I was really happy to see that the latest equity report included not only programs that occurred once, but also systemic changes like how we grade and alignment of job postings with the diversity hiring event. Great job. And my gratitude, because this work makes my children's world more healthy and whole. I also have a question that arose from my reading of the Forward Through Ferguson report, Still Separate, Still Unequal. The report states that in 2017-18, Clayton took advantage of a Missouri Foundation formula loophole, a backdoor provision to the formula that is supposed to make funding more equal across districts that benefits majority white communities. The loophole, called a hold harmless provision, allowed us to use property values from 2004 instead of 17-18 in order to artificially inflate the amount of state funding we received per ADA student. It's legal, but I'm dismayed that although we are the highest spending majority white district and spend $8,412 more per student than the highest spending majority Black district and an astonishing $18,000 more per student than the lowest spending districts, we still resorted to a loophole that upholds disparities based on race. Are we still using this loophole currently in our budget? And if so, should we consider rejecting this avenue which, although legal, upholds the systems of white supremacy and terrible race-based disparities in our region? Thank you for your attention and consideration. And that's all the public comments for this evening.
Great, thank you for reading those, Chris. So we are moving on to board communications. Does anybody have a board communication? Go ahead, Stacy.
Yeah, I attended the PAC Ed Executive Committee meeting on Friday. Robin and Cameron were there as well. And I continue to be impressed with this, how they've kind of reorganized and reimagined this group. It's very well organized. They have, they function, like very, very efficiently with different executive positions. And it just kind of reminded me tonight, as we talked about those affinity groups, that this is a great example of a parent affinity group that ties into all of our, the work that Cameron was talking to earlier. A couple of things that we discussed at the meeting were that they're working on ways to recognize teachers that work with students with disabilities and recognize students. They also are continually looking for ways to educate the community about kids with learning differences. And they loved that Robin's idea at the last meeting, when it was Inclusive Schools Week, that we engaged their students to talk and explain it. So I think they're looking into other ways that their students can be involved in our schools, involved in decision-making and included as leaders, as some thinking groups in our schools. So one of the ideas was even about our board advisory group, that we don't have a student, or I don't know, they didn't think that we have a student included in that group that has learning differences. So they're continually looking for and advocating for their kids to be, leaders in schools and part of decisions and parts of groups that can talk about how to better their experience at school too. So that was it.
Thank you, Stacy. Anybody else have any other board communications? I just have one real quick, which is just as much for the public. So congratulations to Amy and Jason. You will serve another term because you were the only two people who signed up. So we will not have an election. That it basically means that Amy and Jason will be elected. So just a note. Anybody have anything else? All righty. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Right, I move that the Board of Education adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.